Then, calling to order the January 24th, 2023 meeting of the Manchester Essex Regional School District School Committee. This is the business meeting, open session. I do want to acknowledge and thank our Board of Selectmen representatives that are here. And can I invite you, if you do end up having people come in such that you need to call into order before the public hearing begins, just let us know, but otherwise we'll remember to do that at that point. Or do you need to?
So for me, Teresa, because I can't dial in because I create reverb, you need that we can see if somebody can see participants because we only see so few on screen.
Okay.
So
I definitely will not because I won't pay attention to that, but let's see if we can. Kate's on it.
thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right, public comment. Is anyone here to make public comment in person? Seeing none. If there's anybody online that would like to make public comment, please put your name and address in the chat. I can't see the chat because I'm not down there. We don't see anyone in there currently. If there's anybody on the phone that would like to make a public comment, feel free to unmute yourself and say your name and address. Okay, hearing none and seeing none, we will close public comment. Chairman's report. See notes. So I don't forget all my things. Since we last met, we ended up rescheduling. I did not represent us at Student Advisory Council. We're rescheduling that, so we did not meet last week. We did receive 2 community member emails that I replied to on behalf of the committee, and that's all right. There we go. And also represented as chair at the Board of Selectmen Department Heads meeting last night for Essex, which, as I have stated, does not have a Manchester equivalent, so I don't represent there. My message tonight is very brief, but just I've had a chance to reflect a lot on the feedback from our committee members in particular. And I think it's safe to say that not one of us in the last few months hasn't experienced some level of frustration with the process that we're going through right now, everything we're doing and how it's going. I've literally heard that from every single one of us, and I've experienced it myself. So I just want to say in my chairman's report, it may not be pretty, and it may not be how any of us envisioned this work going forward this year, you know, if we had a crystal ball back at the beginning of the year, but the work is getting done, and it is moving forward, and we are having success. So I think that's just something to keep in mind as we move forward, that it is difficult work. It's not always you just show up to the meetings and put in your time. This year, that's not the case, but we're doing it. So even when it's hard, we're getting there. And I think that's important to keep in mind. And that is the balance of my report, with the exception of our review of operating protocols. And the only one I don't have had read yet is Anna. Are you willing to read the next bullet point for us? Thanks. There you go.
10 meetings on time would be well prepared to discuss agenda items. Members who are unable to attend the meeting shall notify the chair in a timely fashion. Quorum of 4 members is required in order for the school committee to meet.
Great. Thanks so much. All right, that closes the chairman's report. Next, we have the consent agenda. We received the information. Consent agenda will include vouchers for warrants 1034 through 1037 and the minutes from 11023. Did everyone have a chance to review the minutes? So you can keep it together. Okay,
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
That's Erica. Is there a second? Second by Jake. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Yes.
That's unanimous. The consent agenda passes. Thank you all. Subcommittee reports, facilities and SBC. We did not meet as a facilities subcommittee, but just wondering, SBC met last night. I got a quick little report from, I know a few of you were there. My report out from Annie was just that on time and under budget, and that the plantings that had been postponed are going to be coming forth
This spring.
this spring at some point. Okay, thank you very much. Anything else pertinent that we needed to, go ahead. Yeah.
Request to be added to the SBC email.
Oh, sure.
I
Yes, I'm
forward
sorry.
it to him when we get them, and I've asked a couple times, but it's just, it
Okay.
just hasn't happened.
Yeah, part of the problem, no, I'm sorry.
This first.
I think with the project team is kind of mostly done. it's probably slipping through the cracks, so I will make sure it happens. I'm gonna get the text going right this second. Sorry, Matt.
All good.
Good thinking. And then,
They've been very short meetings.
Yeah, mostly on invoice approval, to be honest, because there's not much work going on. That all, a little bit in the spring, they, just as a quick refresher, finishing up Concom items that we promised and the plantings.
great, thank you.
Could you, quick update on where we are with the Habib report since we're in Essex Elementary?
Yes, I am due a quote unquote nearly final draft today or tomorrow. I haven't gotten it today, but they're working on it. Jason reached out to them on Thursday. They have all of our feedback. So I hate to say it, I'm sure, but I really believe we should have it by the next meeting. It's been a little painstaking going through it, but we're really trying to cement something that we can have for many years to come.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for your patience. I'm sorry it's taken this long.
And then on a related note, since we're in facilities, is there any update on the bids?
Only that I think there's a a potential bidder walkthrough, I believe tomorrow, where bidders can come and see what a turf field looks like with snow on top. And they don't really need to see the turf that they're pulling up. They're really trying to see things like the approach and all that kind of stuff. Those bids will be due on February 2nd. And I probably will be sending out a notice for a facility subcommittee meeting just to kind of let people know what we've received so that when we meet again on February 7th, we can give you guys an update on what the bids came in like. Hopeful that will help us along the way with this very expensive proposition.
Yes.
So that's all there is to report as of now.
Great, thank you. Finance Subcommittee, we did not meet in full. Three of us met today just to go through a couple quick questions that I had about the budget. We did have a collaborative meeting though, so I put down a few bullet points. Tell me if you think I missed anything. We did some number crunching in real time with the collaborative team to pull together that 3-year outlook so that the towns could decide how they wish to move forward with their plans to finance this, whether they choose to do 1 year or 3 or what have you. We also talked about the field situation and the impact on the credit rating, which I think is going to be part of the conversation later. And also there was some discussion about request for a report about class numbers at the high school, and the response to that was basically that it's just going to take a little bit of time working on it, but any report will take some time. Did I miss anything, Anna?
I don't know how detailed we want to get into.
Well, I think we're going to get into so much detail tonight that I don't, but if there was anything glaring, I don't want to have missed it.
I think we're going to, the bulk of the discussion tonight is going to be about the scenarios we were discussing at the meeting and the potential new pathways on funding for the turf field.
Mhm.
So I think we'll have time to revisit those comments.
Great. Policy Subcommittee.
We did not meet.
Okay, so no status report this time, maybe next time, maybe not. Are you planning to meet before our
We are
next
planning
meeting?
to meet before the next
The
meeting.
30th, I think.
Okay.
is what- yeah.
And negotiations.
Negotiations are ongoing.
It's the best update every time until it says negotiations are
We
complete.
we had our last meeting the day after our last school committee meeting.
Great. Right? There. Sure.
Just because I didn't attend the negotiation meeting, are you guys allowed to go more into about some detailed updates or no?
No,
But at some point in the next, how soon should we expect an executive session with an update?
next Wednesday if we're lucky.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Great.
And I'll do a quick timeline update in my segment
Great.
because I think I'm hopeful we can wrap this by April.
Excellent. All right, that closes subcommittee reports. Superintendent's report.
Sure, my report is just a goals update tonight. I think, switch if I do that. So I'm not going to read all of the bullet points. You had that, so you can ask
Yeah.
plenty of questions based on it. I think the summary, kind of the top line takeaways as I was reflecting and kind of jotting notes to you on where we're at is that you have been hand in hand with me on my 2 key projects this year, which is negotiations and the budget and figuring out a path forward to fund our needs, create stabilization, and doing all of that within constraints that the real constraints that the towns have. So I think you've been right there for the ongoing collaboration, whether it's the collaboration meetings, the subcommittee meetings, or the public meetings. I think we're making progress. I think we're getting close. I think this group has a few more conversations to have. But I'm hopeful we're going to be landing that project on time and on budget. We'll borrow from SBC. Negotiations, I revised the projected timeline. I'm hopeful that we can close out substantive discussions in the next 2 meetings. And that once that's done, then we have to go through all the paperwork alignment, making sure the language is correct, having a pre-meeting with this group to make sure we all agree in principle so that they can bring in ratification. I would think that if we finish our meetings, our substantive meetings by the first week of March, we can have it all complete and ratified by April. Every meeting we push out, I would push out another 2 or 3 weeks just to get all of that work finalized. I think negotiations, when I think about where we started, because we've really been negotiating since fall of last year on this particular contract renewal.
Right.
And at the midpoint last year, we decided that the best course of action was to do a 1-year agreement and the intent was to come into this year and wrap quickly and be ready with all of the financials for budget season. And that just hasn't been the case. The organization has gone through changes in leadership and guidance. We've gone through lots of changes. So I think it's natural, based on the amount of change that happened. There's not as much institutional knowledge. So much like this committee's operating, we're kind of rebuilding and building new trust. Been really pleased with, even though we've changed the model to a more positional, that our intent behind that was never to not be collaborative, but it was try to expedite the process by having things in writing when we went to the table, instead of just starting so broad with brainstorming that it elongated the process even more. So you're seeing how long it's taking just by, we're exchanging paper, there's ideas are down, written down and then amended. I do see the collaborative spirit there for those of you who've been able to attend. I mean, you're right there, you have a front row seat to this process too. I think as we're building trust and we are making progress, that collaborative spirit is becoming more and more evident. And we're kind of getting back to where we had been prior, which is we may have differences of opinion on where this should end, but we are all in this for the betterment of the students and the programs, and we're trying to find solutions that satisfy all perspectives. So, you're all at the table. I'm hoping that's what you see, because I think the intent with negotiations is never to go to the point where you're so positional and you can't share, even if you don't agree, understand the perspective of the other group, that you're trying to do repairs to the relationship for years. I'm feeling confident that we're going to exit this with an agreement that is a compromise. So everybody's going to have to give a little, but keeps relationships intact and provides a good foundation for building forward. So as long as it's taking, I am excited about where we are in the process and hopeful that we can bring it to a close quickly. The project that keeps chugging in the background is our cultural competency work. We were able to, I think we talked a little bit about at the beginning of the year about why spending so much time with the leadership team. Well, the time spent with the leadership team is to give them the tools so they can take and run with it in their schools. So they are actively keeping this train moving forward, and we are coming back at least once a month through our leadership meetings to check in, evaluate, have Michael in. We did a nice mid-year mini session, mini retreat where we mapped against the completed school improvement plans and district improvement plan and strategic plan to say, this is all the language of cultural competence, and this is all the language in our planning, and they really feather together. So we're really not doing 2 sets of things. We're doing one thing, and we're trying to unify it under one header. So coming out of that, they're going to be working this spring with their faculties. We love the idea of the learning lab, the faculty meeting learning lab, where they're starting to use case studies, problems of practice to walk through the components of cultural competence so that they can start trying on for size and using some problem solving methods around them. So reporting out that we are making good progress in building the capacity of the staff to start to now move the work to the next level, which is in benefit of the students. When I was reviewing where we are, we've actually made some early gains on the district improvement plan. We have, see if I can find it here. So in terms of authentic learning, we're seeing the NEASC review as a big piece for the elementary to start to establish its understanding, common definition and approach. So our first step is an application process to NEASC. You have to apply to be reviewed. So the application is due to go in early spring. And if accepted, we'll be able to start our formal self-assessment process in the fall. And what that will mean is both principals will be working with their teams to go through a process of standards-based self-assessment to see where we are against the same standards we've used to build the secondary vision of the graduate component. So the goal in this is to have them take stock, align, get some external inputs as to where we should be as an elementary program, and reorganize themselves in accordance with the whole vertical view of the vision of the graduate. So it's really exciting. In talking with the NEASC team, they like where we're going with this. Obviously, they want to work with us, but they've been able to point to a couple of communities in New Hampshire, one of the names is escaping me right now, where they have done this work and gone on a multi-year cycle where they're continually evaluating the different levels and doing so with one lens. They thought our strategic plan was going to be very helpful and that we had done a good amount of pre-work to not let the high school accreditation concepts and principles stand alone, but tie them back to other work we were doing. So some of it's starting to come together. So from words on a page to some actions. I spoke about DEI. Some of the leadership team is doing an authentic assessment / project-based learning tied to social justice training. We're part of a Mass Youth Partnership group. So we are getting access to that program through that. I haven't heard a ton of feedback yet, but again, all in service to our goals of building a framework for authentic learning. The MTSS district team, that's on track. The team, that's new for us. We have an inter-district team. So we've got members from both schools working together to review assessments, set benchmarks. So the good news there is they've accepted the mission. We're moving on schedule. We're delivering on our different timelines and meeting our calendar deliverables for the year. And in talking, just have been able to observe them only briefly. They really seem to be working well together. And in speaking with Angela, reports that she's really pleased that we're starting to work ourselves into some new routines that will build on themselves and improve the process as we go. We continue to work on our inclusion concepts. And part of that is the special education review, which is underway and should have a report out to school committee sometime in April. That's both a program quality and a financial review in there. So some of the questions around, the efficiencies of the programs versus the quality of the programs, the offsets, they're looking at all of it. And what we always ask for, we did one 3 years ago. Every 3 years, we like to bring them in. What we always ask for is recommendations on where we could be doing some things better and help us find efficiencies that we can't see ourselves because we're too mired in the day-to-day. So we look forward to that report. What they're doing is interviewing faculty, staff, families at all levels, and then doing some surveying, doing some observations, taking inputs and data from us, and then we'll generate the report. So that's exciting. Other things are just playground. I mean, we know where they're all at. We report on them regularly. So that's the big picture. Happy to take questions.
Yeah.
But we've got a lot going on.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. I have a question. Does anyone else? Go ahead, Anna.
No, you go first.
I got it. Because it might be answered. Go ahead.
Two things.
Yeah.
Back in July, June, August-ish, like sometime in the summer, when you first introduced when we first discussed about the improvement plan, I raised the section about DEI. And I think that we went back and forth and talked about the plan originally is to get a faculty trained and then you focus on the student. At the time I raised that, why don't we incorporate some activities so the students don't have to wait for 2 years then to enjoy the whatever training that we are trying to implement right now. And also the teachers with the turnover, we don't know how consistent it's gonna be.
Yeah.
So back to the same questions again. I understand that there are some mini retreats for the faculties. And I think that back then you mentioned that you're gonna bring Michael to this committee to further explain in December, but that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So I'm still curious about how we're incorporating the day-to-day culture or whatever that might be to our students instead of just waiting for 2 years for the teacher to be trained. And to give you an example, we just had a Chinese New Year.
Yep.
And I'm more biased, and I'm one of the minorities. But how are we using this opportunity to, teach our kids about what it's about? I personally go into my kids' elementary school class every year, but I'm only teaching 19 people at a time.
Mhm.
But how can we make this better experience and have kids to be more culturally aware about what's going on around us and not wait for 2 years?
So what
The
I've,
second- oh,
yep.
and the
Go
second
ahead.
question is about MCAS. And maybe this is embedded in. I think back in October, November, when we went over the MCAS results, and I think the conclusion was, I could be wrong, but I think the conclusion was there may be some things that we need to look into, the curriculum wise, and maybe some student learning, because compared to other schools we didn't score as high as we had anticipated.
Okay.
How is that embedded in here to look at the curriculum reviews and whatnot? Are we waiting for the director of curriculum to be on board? And how is that embedded to your goal? Because ultimately you're accountable.
So question one, what I've asked the principals to do is in their spotlight presentations, highlight for you different projects and curriculum activities that they have going on that address cultural awareness. So you'll be seeing a spotlight from each school. That will be one of the topics that they cover. Okay. The work in my goals is to how to prepare the team for the work that they need to do. The principals will be reporting out on the work that's happening in their schools. So you're going to learn a little bit about that as we go through the spring. MCAS, that's an ongoing, everyday, I should not say MCAS, student achievement and student improvement is an ongoing everyday goal for everyone in the districts. It's embedded in the standards of evaluation. We aren't waiting for anyone new to arrive. We have an active curriculum director now who is working with our district-based teams, and then the principals are working with their school-based teams to make adjustments and corrections based on the data analysis that was done in November. So it is ongoing, whether it's in, students being assessed into interventions mid-year. I mean, we benchmark 3 times a year to identify students who have needs and needs intervention. That's the entire MTSS structure, or parts of the MTSS structure. At the secondary level, the principals were key contributors to that assessment report, and they are now making adjustments and working at grade level teams to have people prep and make real-time corrections to their instructional program to try to better our scores. So it's ongoing.
Erica, go ahead. I wouldn't expect to see this necessarily identified as a bullet point.
Yeah.
But I think it is connected to ongoing goals, so I just wanted to raise it. Diego raised for us a couple of months ago the issue of some weaknesses in our high school math curriculum and the idea that in order for current juniors to be prepared for really big tests coming up, that it would be helpful to think about a way that we can help catch those kids up.
Mhm.
I've seen it firsthand. They're behind. The SATs are really hard if you haven't had solid math.
Yeah.
So I was hoping that I don't, and sometimes I don't know where this should fit, whether it's your goal. I know it's obviously a high school related concept, but I feel like it probably has to start somewhere.
Yep. I think it's important to think about these in terms of things that are everyday problems to tackle, and I put that in that bucket.
Yeah.
And these goals established 2 years ago as a
Okay.
roadmap for large scale endeavors that we were taking on that would consume time, energy, and could have cultural impacts on the district. That's how these were established. Something like that, it's a simple, I need to check in with Trish to see where she is in the process of planning for that. Because she had said that she was going to be looking at a resource
Yeah. I
redeployment.
just don't want to lose. Sometimes there's these things that don't relate to a high level goal, and I think that they can easily get lost,
Yep.
even if they're important. So.
Yep.
Sorry to
That's-
distract from the larger agenda.
No,
I think that's
it's not a
reasonable.
distraction, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Can I,
Any other questions?
to follow up on that, from what you said, Pam, can I, and maybe this is to the committee, is this the standard template that we use for the superintendent goals? The
It
reason why I
It has
ask,
been.
the reason why I ask is, like you mentioned, there's some daily stuff that you work on and that we might not see it reflected here. But wouldn't that be easier, or maybe to incorporate some KPI, the key performance indicator, into your goals?
Yeah.
So it's easier for us to see the changes, especially if this is a 2-year thing. It's hard to follow what the changes are, and also there's some of the good things that you do that is not reflected here, that is ongoing, as you say. Just something to think about next time when we do it, if it's possible.
Yep. We can look at the amount of reporting and what's reasonable.
Yeah.
This has been the determination that we would hit key goals, and that would become the 4-time report over 2 years. At the end of the cycle, you'll get a multi-page document, which is standards-based with a self-reflection on where I am against all of those standards. And then that will be your opportunity to weigh in, ask questions. We'll do this whole process with that larger document. Like,
It is hard every time we come up with something we haven't done before
Yeah.
to know where it came from and how it came to be in this way and what the next step is if we wish to develop that further. I think that's reasonable. Yeah.
But this is what I understand to be the standard practice that's happening statewide, because when you see that document, it's large, it's extensive, and it's not realistic for us to be going through and doing every standard and substandard at 4 times a year or 3 times a year. Sometimes some of the pieces will be active and some of the pieces will be dormant. So what we try to establish with the goals is a highlight of which pieces will be taking center stage, with the assumption that all of the other things are standard operating procedure.
I did have one question. I think I'm going to slightly shift it a teeny bit, but it had to do just going off what Anna was asking about the DEI work, because so much of the student learning is based in that. I had a question from a community member who also pays attention to school committee and who's a parent, wondering at what point and at what level should a parent expect communications about the work that the district is doing with Michael Eatman? Just wondering, generally speaking, what is a reasonable thing to expect?
I think that's a great question, and I don't know the time on it right now, because I was hopeful that we were going to have an extended mid-year workshop with the school committee.
Yeah.
And that would be the initial introduction to the work he's doing. And Michael is really coaching. I think that's key to understanding what he's doing. He's coaching us to be broader perspective takers, to question our own assumptions, to define collectively what equity means. So he is not instilling a program. He is helping us think through and work with people on getting through some barriers we may have to change. And I think sometimes this gets framed in the really big picture national agenda items, when we're really working through is something that we all have had some discussions about this week, which is our goal to bring together 2 grade 5 teams. And what does that mean culturally for 2 towns who might have very different views of how that should look?
It's a great
Right. So I
example.
think that's a perfect example of what he's coaching us through, which is it's been a perceived inequity for a very long time that one group had access to something the other didn't. So we're, with good intention, making a step forward, but it's not easy. And it's bringing out some unintended consequences that I need my team to be able to navigate through and bring people together to see the good that can come of it, not just some of what maybe felt like we're giving up. That's where Michael Eatman plays a key role, because we all have a set of skills, but we're in some new territory with forging new relationships with people. So he plays a key role in providing counsel to all of us on how we can stay open-minded, be receptive and open, and hear different points of view and try to mediate and bring people to a different place. So I would encourage, this isn't about the new lesson. This is about a new understanding of how we have to approach every group in front of us, build relationships, and seek to understand our differences and come to some common ground.
That's great. That's a great real-time example. And I love, and I also love that we will be seeing some of the fruits of that in the spotlight presentations coming this spring. Anyone else have questions about the superintendent goals update? Okay.
So you only have from this goal, this was started 2020, are we in the second year?
Yes.
So you only have about a few months left in this goal setting, right? What do you think are the most challenging thing that you feel like from this goal setting thing that you might not be able to achieve what you anticipated to achieve?
We're going to talk about one thing tonight extensively. I'm really concerned. I think we need to know what the outcome is. And the outcome of, we're going to assume a positive outcome. If we are able to get a correction and move forward, I feel like energy and time will be restored to focus more heavily on teaching and learning. It's become, as I've reflected over the past couple of weeks about where did the first semester of school go, I don't feel good about my activity in the buildings. I'm not out, I'm not getting to where I want to be. I am spending a lot of time with spreadsheets, reports. We've onboarded some new people. There's just been a lot of technical work that's been very time consuming. It's necessary work. It's important to build relationships. There's a lot of new. But the budget work for 2 to 3 years now has consumed an inordinate amount of time of the leadership team. And it's also stifled us from really being able to look forward because we're always trying to figure out, we don't really know where we are. So we don't know how much time we have to invest. We don't know how, there's an impact when you're talking about cuts and reductions in lost staff, when you're trying to engage people and thinking about new and different ways of doing things, because people go into a little bit of a protective mode. So I think that's why we framed the strategic priority in terms of stabilization. It's not about having like money just flowing in and investing and building new things. It's really just about understanding where we're at and having budget not be synonymous with schooling. And I think school committee time is spent on budget too much. I think we need to rethink moving other things onto the platform. So we're talking more about the teaching and learning.
It's a great
I think
question.
solving
and a
this
great answer.
problem and building some multi-year stability will allow us to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that leads nicely into our next item on the agenda, which is the continued business of mid-year budget to actual report and transfers. So shall we move into that?
Sure.
All right.
I had sent out a package of information and I'm sure someone's able to pull it up, but we typically like to do a big transfer and budget to actual update in the fall. At that point, as we've talked about, you really have a sense of who's on staff for the year. It gives you a great big item of change as well as a general sense of who's on the health insurance plan. Those are the two biggest costs. So we went through that exercise in November. And there are some things at that time that were still, with that said, a little too preliminary to start estimating. Just to give a couple examples that I referenced in my notes, we pay stipends that are part of the teacher's contract, as well as coaching stipends for athletics at a cycle that's different than that. And so we pay our professional stipends, things like mentoring and teacher leaders, curriculum development, as well as items like extracurricular activities for clubs, et cetera, December and May. So a little premature to be forecasting that in November when we did our last set of transfers. We also have a whole host of things like hourly work for things like substitutes, for example. Often substitutes will come in for leaves of absences. Those tend to materialize throughout the year. Those are some of the things that we talked about. And then just knowing a little bit more about our insurance trajectory. Those are some of the newer updates that were reflected. Things like utilities, we really don't have much new information because it's so seasonal, and so much of that information will start to come out in the next 1 to 2 months because this is really the time of year between heating and electricity where you're really spending your money. So with that said, we did put some updates in. There weren't as many changes as we saw last time, and I spoke to some of them. We had an unfilled position that we were keeping on the books at the last update, but we realize now we don't need. It is part of the fiscal 24 reduction package. So that's the $80,000 reduction that you see in the special ed teachers area. We talked about the fact that the 4 FTE reductions in fiscal 24, 2 in general ed and 2 in special ed. The other items are really kind of small on this page, which is the personnel side. And moving down to the next page, which is the operating expenses. Could we scroll down, please? You can see, really the biggest change there is the insurance and other benefits taking that number down. We talked about, you can see in the November transfer that we had brought down that number. And this is kind of our estimate, best case estimate, sorry, our best estimate of where we think the rest of the year will roll through. And while we don't need to reduce the budget there, we could let it go. The transfers are only typically areas where we want to provide additional funding. We did, present a recommendation of increasing the budget allocation for out-of-district tuition, not because the total cost is changing. In the detailed budget pages, you can see the different funding streams, some of which is the budget number. You can see the budget in that area at $1.1 million to start the year, but that included some one-time money that we were funding this year's out-of-district tuition through with circuit breaker. We've talked a lot about how circuit breaker picture is improving, but typically we like to use the money that we get in a given fiscal year as an offset for the next year. You have to use it within that 1 year period, rather than using it in the same year that you get it, if you can. Now that we're a good part of the year through, and we're seeing that, for example, the health insurance savings is there, we're not going to refill that position. I do think it makes sense to hold that circuit breaker money for the maximum amount, have it offset next year. So that's why, to do that, we would not spend it through the circuit breaker fund until next year, which would increase the amount that we spend in the budget. So it's really just about managing that over a second year. Those are really the biggest changes that are in there. And I can't remember if I had any notes on the administrative. Oh, that's the contracted services. Sorry, I was just trying to line up there. So the other line that increased, we had talked about in some of our voucher updates recently, where there have been some questions asked about contracted services for related service professionals, including which are typically speech language, occupational therapy, physical therapy, audiology. And sometimes we have those on an ongoing basis. Sometimes we will use them on a short-term basis to cover leaves of absence, just like you would for substitute. But it's difficult to hire a substitute for a professional like that. So that's where contracted services come in. And so that's the estimate that we have right now to cover an overage through the end of the year, $31,485. So with that, I'd like to see if the school committee would consider supporting these transfer requests. As is our typical practice, we will come in really towards the end of the fiscal year to say, here's what we're seeing as a preliminary look at end of year savings overages, and do that June transfer request that we've done every year. As you know, as we close the books over the course of the summer, we'll start to provide updates for things like how are the reserves pictures looking? What are the final numbers? For example, we may not get final state revenue numbers on things like transportation until late June, sometimes even the first week of July for the preceding fiscal year. So those are some of the reasons why there is budgetary updates through the late summer. And then when the auditors come in, which is typically in November, that's when we start to get all of our final packages together of exactly what the balance sheets are going to look like, how it's going to get submitted to Department of Revenue. That's the trajectory of changes that you can typically expect from here on out. So any questions that people have or anything I can answer? Yeah.
Can I just ask a procedural question before we do? So do we want to entertain a motion and then do questions as part of the discussion so that we can put this all together? Because I want to make sure we're able to do our budget hearing for the public as well. Is that something we could do?
Makes sense.
Okay, all right. So for the wording of the motion, if I recall, can we just move to?
Accept the operating budget transfers as presented.
Okay, so I will move that we accept the operating budget transfers as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion, please, go ahead.
I don't want to repeat if you guys already discussed it in a subcommittee meeting today.
I think it's worthwhile anyway, go ahead.
So it might be So question, before I jump into it, maybe some clarifying question.
Mhm.
So the bottom one, if you're on the operating expense, just a housekeeping thing, the updated FY forecast, the last number, you're 290K off because it didn't get carried over. Or it got copied over, but it was a formula error. It should be 28,635, 970 instead of 28,925, 978.
This one right here?
The one below it. It should be
You're
the
right.
same.
Yep,
Yeah.
correct. Thank you.
Now, that being said, if you go up to stay on this page, what you are saying is we're forecasting, we're gonna be net $290,000 less than what we revised the budget for back in October.
It's still, no, it's still, compared to the full fiscal year.
That's right. Compared to the full fiscal year, the revised budget, we're gonna be right now projecting $290,000 less. Even after we make the adjustment of the transfers.
No, it's compared to the beginning year budget. So the individual line items are, yes, compared to the fall. You're correct on an individual line basis,
That's
but the
right, yeah.
total budget from November is the same as the total budget from the beginning. So it's not new additional savings, it's total savings in either way. This just shows you how it's distributed. We've updated that. But the 290 is really compared to the starting number because the starting number and the fall number are the same.
That's right. So what I'm saying is the 290 is the individual line items that we are actually projecting to be $290,000 less.
Correct. That's projected savings at the end of the year at this point in time. It's very
I know that.
preliminary.
So my question is, why don't we reflect that in the budget transfer to reflect $290,000 less? For example, if you go up to the personnel, we are already end of January, so all the teacher positions,
Yep.
admin positions, whatever position, all these personnel positions are
You wanna
set,
scroll up?
right?
Go up a page.
Yep,
Yeah,
the
go up to
personnel.
the
Yep.
page.
Mhm.
So all this, if you go to
I
the
think I
salaries.
understand your question.
So the variances that you see, for example, superintendent's office, like, the, $3,400, but if you go to curriculum director, 37,914.
Yep.
And then like, there is like 14,000, 11,000, 31,000 that is not part of the budget transfer. Because the first budget transfer is 80,000.
You're
For
correct.
everything else above,
Yep.
we know those are gonna be savings because the
We
positions
estimate.
that's in
Yep,
place.
that's correct.
Then why don't we ask for budget transfer for the savings?
Yep.
To have the budget reduction?
It's a great question.
Because
Yep.
right now, if you keep budget neutral of the transfers, you're basically moving things, the savings from insurance, for example, $131,000 to fund special ed tuition out, like $144,000.
Yeah.
While to keep the budget transfer neutral, not changing it, when there's actual savings.
I understand your question.
Projecting already.
Yeah.
290K worth.
I think it's a great question. And what it is really the difference between a forecast and a budgetary adjustment. So to do what you're saying, what you would essentially do would be to vote to reduce the budget. And so if you had, for example, any increased spending between now and the end of the year that you didn't know about, you wouldn't have the authority to do that. You would be revoking that authority. And once we make an amendment to lower the budget, that's the way it is until such time you can't increase the budget without going back to the two town meetings for an additional vote. That's how the statutory work happens. However, you can provide a forecast so we can accomplish the same goal. So the transfers really achieve a statutory goal, which is to say, we are not allowed to spend beyond what we've told you by category without alerting you and getting your okay. So if we have an area where we expect an overage in a category, we need to ask for a transfer. We can't do that unless there's savings someplace else, so we show where that savings is coming. But what we're not proposing to do, and I don't know any districts that do, is to reduce our total budget. Once you vote that, that becomes an amendment that goes to the two towns. It becomes accepted unless they want to bring it up in the meeting, which they wouldn't do typically. And then through the rest of the year, you're locked, that's your new ceiling. So you would be reducing your statutory ceiling through the year. The purpose of the forecast is to give you the savings estimate so you can say, how are we tracking? But the purpose of the transfers is to show how we will use our town meeting voted authorization for spending and appropriation by category. Does that
That's
answer your
helpful.
question?
Now, the 290,000 at the end of the year, if there is savings, if we don't change the budget, bottom line,
Mhm.
that savings in theory will go into the reserves, yeah?
You're correct.
So the reason why I ask that is if we don't change the budget bottom line, knowing that we have a forecasted savings 290K,
Mhm.
we should keep that in mind when we're doing the 2024 budget. Because that changed our beginning balance of the unrestricted.
That's exactly
by
why we're here.
280K.
Yes,
Mhm.
you're right. And that's
But it
why,
doesn't
that's,
reflect that.
and so in the past, we would do a transfer at the year end so people could see where we're at. To the extent that we time permitted, we would do one in the fall as well, so we could see how we were tracking. But the mid-year one is another one that was recommended. This is the first year we've done one in this month because people are saying, hey, while we're looking at the budget, can you give us an updated sense of where things are? As you can see from this, there isn't a lot that changes because we know so much in November, but it does exactly your goal, Anna, which is to say, community, we're going through a budget process. Here's our best guess of where we are. I wouldn't recommend to reduce the appropriation amount because it's still an estimate and we have things that happen all the time. For example, on the operating expense side, when you saw that a contracted services need.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's not one that I knew about in November, but it's here. Utility one, we knew about that over the summer, so we adjusted the budget. But it could be in another situation if we hadn't entered into a multi-year contract. If that happened in February, you need savings someplace else, otherwise you're going to the town meetings. So this is a best case estimate. I don't know where the year will land yet, and I think we need to keep our minds open. For example, if you have someone goes out of district beyond what we're expecting, that could be a, 100,000 prorated for half a year, maybe that's a $50,000 hit plus the transportation. Maybe that's an additional 30,000. You could have an $80,000 hit, for example, for a student. You could have,
A movement.
move in, you could have a leave of absence that you don't expect for which you need a long-term sub. I'm not trying to paint a dire picture. I'm trying to tell you why having that $290,000 disclosure is important, but why we wouldn't want to reduce the budget at this time.
I think what we need to do is just to be transparent in the budget, FY 24, when we're talking about the reserves. And the ask that we need from both towns. Because right now, if we're saying that the gap is 750,000.
Mhm.
In reality, and then it's because that in 2023, we had to use reserve 520.
Great
In
point.
reality, 290K roughly maybe projected is gonna go back. So our ceiling of the unrestricted beginning balance 22 and 24 is actually higher than what we are presenting right now in the 2024
I
budget.
agree with you. I think that's a great point, and we don't know where it's going to end, but it's a good disclosure to have this
But I
time.
think we
Yep.
just need to be transparent in how we're presenting it, otherwise in the numbers don't tie.
I also think we need to stick to it's the discussion of a vote or not. I mean, that's a separate, sounds tangential conversation to this is the discussion on a vote right now to approve these. That's a secondary piece of what we're doing. Being transparent is important, but this is the discussion on a vote,
Okay,
right?
sure.
I just want to get us back to what, I have just.
Go for it. Yeah.
Go
ahead, Erica.
I mean, I guess I just want to say, I appreciate your point, but at the same time, I now understand that better than I did before. So I'm grateful for you pointing that out. And I do think it's something we need to have in our minds. And since we didn't have the discussion before, I think it was an important point. So.
Are there any other questions about this? Go ahead, Matt.
On health insurance, Abby,
Yeah,
is that? It's fiscal, do the plans roll over like fiscal year, like July 1? Is
they
that-
do. They
So-
do.
So is that more than like, you forecasted more like, say, family plans versus you got more individuals, or is it more like utilization rate, do you know?
It's not there's a small amount of utilization, which is kind of what we knew back in the fall when we did our first transfer, because that's the difference between the rate we budgeted at about 10 and the rate that we got, which was, I think, 879. But there's a difference in the mix of who's on an individual plan, who's on a family plan, how many people who stayed. We're on 75-25 split, which is the old split. New people have been coming on for some time at 70-30. So those are some of the changes that we're rolling through.
And what's your process for kind of say guessing that every year? Like, do you,
Yeah.
like a historical?
Well, it's a good question because it's an area where we're seeing more savings than I like to have. And I know it came up in our finance subcommittee meeting, and it's a big item. We do a name by name forecast. So that's the first thing. So it is a detailed forecast. However, what we do is we estimate where we're going to end the year. We try to not cut it too close because you do have changes mid-year. We also tend to estimate how many retirees are going to come on and what plans are going to come on. We've been seeing a faster migration to the Medicare supplement plan, which is a lot cheaper for people who are aging into Medicare. So that's been helping us a little bit. But ultimately, yeah, this is more savings than I would like to see in the budget. The good news is that when we estimated fiscal '24, we put our rate assumption, we put our rate assumption
Back and forth.
off of the full savings of '23.
Okay.
So whatever we're expecting now with this final recognition of the budget transfer, that's a lowered number so that our current 12% assumption for '24 is off of the lowered, more realistic number. So we try to, as soon as we get that realistic sense of the numbers being lower, we try to roll it right through the next budget season, so we're not inflating the '24.
All right, maybe one or two more. Go ahead.
Just to follow on the insurance, just wanna, it's not a question, just wanna be awareness, bring the awareness. So I think back in October, we also requested a transfer on this health insurance line, 185,000. And now we're requesting for another 113,000. So total under budget, we're projecting and asking to transfer 318,000. Just FYI, that's about 6%. That is less than the budget. So, and then just keep in mind that, like you said, that we mentioned in the finance subcommittee, is massive under budget every single year. So we just need to keep in mind.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with the fact it's every single, but it has been several years. It is a big number, and it is true. It can be challenging to forecast accurately. We do it name by name, but I agree with you. Your big point, your major point, I totally agree.
Well, last year was 500,000 under budget, the year before 277,000.
So
it's
those, so
significant.
right there, 277 versus 500,000 is a pretty big difference.
And this year is 300K. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I just want to raise it just to be, we are going to be consistent. We have been seeing consistent on the budget in this line.
Yeah,
So
I will always budget this line conservatively. That's one thing I can guarantee you. I would strongly recommend that because if you don't budget it conservatively and you go over, this one number will completely impact your budget for the negative. And that's between, we talk sometimes about how a couple of students can impact the out-of-district number, but we've also reminded people that that's somewhere between 3% and 5% of your budget. When you have a change in this number, that's about 20% of your budget, you're really going to be in jeopardy of having a budgetary crisis. So my goal is to budget conservatively. I agree with your major point. I don't want it to be too conservative. And so we're doing what we can. I would like to keep it, I would like to improve this area. So I
totally
agree.
get it. The
Maybe
only
that's something we
downside
could
of
talk
that-
about at finance subcommittee, though, since that's a long-term thing, bringing
No, I think
awareness.
that's something the school committee should be aware. The only downside when we budget such major potential budget savings, while we're trying to keep the budget bottom line the same for whatever, for the reason that you just mentioned, that we don't want to vote again to reduce the budget. The only downside of that is you are changing the integrity of the different budget lines, because we will be moving or requesting the budget transfer throughout the years to move the savings of the health insurance to other lines when we are already trying to budget precisely, like you mentioned, like the positions by name and whatever it is, and then we are making strategic decision by budget line. And throughout the year, if we are moving the health insurance savings to other lines, it just changed the integrity of what we're trying to do here. So just to be aware.
Can I comment on that too? And because I like the way you're looking at that, the thing that I have to remind myself though is that this is a living, breathing budget. We're just not set. Correct me where I am. We start with a budget, but it is understood that this is dynamic in this process. And so that's why the general timing that we work with is on the year. That's why we get a budget for the year, and then we have to work within that for the year. Have we had any concern from town partners about making transfers throughout the years and that sort of thing? Is that something that is about the dynamic nature of a budget being that way? Is that?
To give you an example, like, last year.
Hold on, can I just want to hear that first and then we'll ask.
No, we haven't
Okay.
brought to our, we haven't had that concern brought to our attention. The
Okay.
only context I'll give is when we were forming the budget last year, there was, I don't know how closely people were paying attention, we took some things out of the budget to lower the number. So yes, I think we need to attend to this and have ongoing conversation. But we put in $500,000 of reserves to backstop the budget, but we also reduced our initial special education out of district number by about $250,000 with the understanding that we would backstop that with reserves. So we did go in conservatively on particular lines, knowing that we were carrying liability into the budget. So I just caution everyone, and this is my role, like the numbers tell a story, but there's a greater context to how we arrived at publicly with disclosure and discussion what we set those numbers at last year and what we set the percentages at with all the same documents being used. So I do challenge the transparency commentary. I do think we have been extremely transparent and open with the budget, with all of the documents and taking inputs. So I think we can attend to it. I think we can look at it going forward, but I think there are liabilities in this budget that we don't have a sheet for, which I would like to see going forward, which is I would like to see our page of liabilities that aren't showing up here in the operating budget for which this money may become necessary. Potential out of district placements, our ongoing, if you remember at the end of last year, we had to do a significant transfer to cover the negative balance on the revolving lunch debts. So we have debts and obligations that the auditors factor into, or the DOR rather factors into determining our E&D. I think we need to find a place to place those on the budget. We also need to find a place in this budget document to report out our liabilities and grant funded positions. So if our grants come in slightly lower than anticipated, we have 15 or 16 positions that are being carried by that. They'd either be cuts or, I mean, there are other components than just this one page. So while I take the input and I think it's important for us to consider, and perhaps we can refine the number going forward, I think we need a little bit bigger picture too. So the whole committee can have a more informed discussion on where there are potential concerns that can come around the corner in the second half of the year.
And that connects too to your goals update, that right in there was a redesign of the budget document itself that you haven't had a chance to get to with the other commitments. Erica, go ahead.
Pam, in keeping with what you just said, because it certainly makes sense if there's things that we don't anticipate that don't have a line item on there. If in fact we had a healthier reserve structure, would you feel differently such that we don't need to be building it into the budget so much, but we would, in the instance of, for example, the unexpected out of district transfer, we'd be going to our reserves because we've maintained a healthy balance of reserves, and we would have perhaps an ability to more accurately reflect the.
We could go to the reserves for the 1 year, but then it needs to come into operating. So what essentially we did last year is we made the assumption on healthcare may have been a point or 2 or 3 higher than it should have been in the end. But we removed $250,000 in contingency money for out of district placements that we were anticipating this year. And said just that there is reserves. If they come up, we'll fund them with that for the year, but then have to move it into operating the following.
Got it.
Some districts, we don't need, as a regional, I don't think it's necessary, but some districts will carry either a joint fund with the town or a contingency line in their budget for these types of things. So I think there's more to the story is all I'm offering.
Sure. So seeing that it is 7:02, what I'd like to suggest is that I appreciate the raising of the awareness, and I want to suggest that we continue having this conversation at finance subcommittee level too, because I think there's value to that, to us understanding and then being able to bring it to the awareness of the committee as well as we move forward.
And I would say if you want to move, when we look at the budget scenarios, to lower our budget by $290,000 in anticipation of this over budgeting this year, and you think we're missing something, you can certainly do that.
That's a thing we can discuss. Okay. But for the moment, how about, is there anybody else that has clarifying questions that need answering before we move the vote on the transfers? Okay. And so vote on the motion as presented. All in favor? All opposed? Anyone? No, I'm taking the vote right now. Are you opposed or are you abstaining? Okay. So that's 6 in favor, 1 opposed. Motion carries. Okay. Thank you for the budget to actual report. And now we are moving into the public hearing portion of the evening. And I know there are at least a couple committees that are going to need to call into order that are cross-posted here. So who'd like to start? Go ahead.
I will call the Board of Selectmen to order.
Oh, can I ask a favor? This is for Maria.
So Maria, Ruth, Chair of the Board of Selectmen for Essex.
Thank you.
And present with me this evening is Peter Pittman, Selectman, and Guy Brown from staff.
Thank you. Anyone else calling into session?
Do we have any more FinCom?
Are there any more finance?
I see Josh, we have Nina and I here. That's correct.
Chris is right behind you, so that's,
I'll make a motion to call the Essex Finance Committee into session.
that's Benjamin Buttrick.
All in favor?
Thank you.
Chair, all in favor?
I have six cornhole.
Manchester Board of Selectmen or Finance Committee, do you have a quorum and need to call into session? You didn't post, okay. Got it. Okay. Then I think we're in business. Yes? So I will invite, so Pam and Avi, of course, are going to present. I would invite us as a committee if we wish to fan out a smidge so our people can see really well. And then that way, when there's interaction, we're able to engage.
I also want to try to.
But also feel free to grab snacks.
Is there anything that you sent or this? I don't need to look at it.
I'm sorry? Not necessarily.
Presentation will match
So,
that.
yeah.
Right?
What's that? It will be.
Nobody
It's
eats
not-
too much, so I'm just.
Chris, would you mind grabbing some water? I can't find my can.
Yeah. Let's just bring a bunch up, 'cause it's dry in here. Are you cold?
What I'd like to get a sense for is who's already stepped through the broader presentation. We'll all abbreviate some of the background that we did for the original budget hearing, and some folks may not have been there, but have certainly been at others, so have a sense for it. So in December, we present our preliminary budget where we estimate what we think our assumptions will be and where they'll land. And we do a lot of that without having real numbers. Well, we find ourselves in January without having too many more refined numbers than we had in December. Our key variables like health won't settle out until April, which lends itself to some of the problem that we were discussing before, because we are going to go into closing this budget right on the 7th. The committee will vote to approve a final budget for town, and we still won't have a settled number from our broker on where they think we'll land. In March, we still may go out and go in the open market and see if we can get a better deal by inviting bidders to come in and change our healthcare plan. So there's a process that will take place for March and through early April to continue to refine that number, which may land us in a better place than where the budget lands us in the beginning. So that's a little bit of discrepancy. We're not going to get into that tonight, other than to say there's really no substantive change in the technical aspects of the budget from where we were in December. The numbers are very much the same. We continue to watch and learn. We continue to watch utilities. We continue to watch healthcare, but we don't have significant updates in finances tonight. I think we're in the big picture realm tonight. What we talked about in December was a little bit of our methodology. A very quick review of that. We start with goals, right? So there's more to the budget than the accounting. We spent a lot of time on the spreadsheets in our discussions, but behind the spreadsheets, the purpose of the spreadsheets is promotion of the program and support of our goals as a district, whether the school committee goals, the strategic goals, or the individual school goals. We are building a budget to promote those values and promote those objectives that we've laid out there. I think it struck me in our discussions about budget this year that we're losing that piece. And I think Jake has done a great job of trying to remind us there's more to the budget than just the numbers. There's the why behind it. So when we're talking about conversations around the numbers of enrollment or class size, some of the answers are very simple and some of them are complex in terms of when you we build schedules and we build courses and we organize classes in the best interest of student needs. We don't back into them based on a number. That's not to say we're not doing that as efficiently as possible or with an eye to the bottom line. We do. but there's a lot of student choice and a promotion of student goals and what their post high school goals are when we build a program, when we staff a program. Good example, middle school. The middle school model requires a certain amount of investment. We could transfer that to a junior high model and maximize the number of teacher heads per student heads by changing the teaming concept and having them move more through a rotating high school schedule, similar to what was done pre-middle school. The district movement several years ago to create a middle school, and a lot of investment has been put into that. So there's a lot we can do. And if we make a decision to change course and build for pure bottom line and efficiency, we just have to take on the questions of philosophy that may come along with it. That's a long way of saying we're building a budget to support what we believe the school committee goals and the strategic plan goals are before us, and not what they could be in the future, leaving all doors open if necessary. We also have a set of budget goals, and we have guiding principles. And one of our guiding principles is, while we're in pursuit of our larger goals and objectives educationally, we also have an eye to the bottom line, and we always try to bring in a consistent budget. So through many discussions over the years, 3.5% assessment growth is what we target for, and bringing it in under if at all possible. This is just a series of charts that show we've been meeting our obligation in terms of bringing in a 3.5% budget stably over the years. It's becoming more difficult to do, and that's in part from what we know to be a suppression of the real cost of growth to try to hit our town benchmarks. And after 7 years or so, it starts to break down, and that's the discussions that are before us tonight. We go through some key terms. These are always worth mentioning. There's spending growth, assessment growth, and apportionment formula. They all factor into different perceptions of what's affordable and not affordable. When we talk about spending growth, that's our year-to-year growth, budget over budget on spending from year to year. So it costs X in 2023 to run the program. It's going to cost Y, and the difference between that is the spending growth. The assessment growth is what portion of that increase is passed on to the towns after we take out all external funding. So things like Chapter 70, for example, or transportation aid get deducted off the top, and the remainder of the bill is what factors into assessment. And then apportionment is really beyond anyone's control. It's set out in the regional formula, and it explains how we divvy up the final total between the two towns. And it roughly breaks down over time between a 65-35 split. Level services. This term I'm hating these days because I think it's not sending the right message. Some people call it a carry forward. Some people call it a maintenance of effort. We've called it a level service. It doesn't mean we're not investing in the district. It doesn't mean we're not changing how we do things or finding new and creative ways of offering opportunities for kids. What it means is we're working within the same scope of services from year to year. We're not adding whole new departments or whole new programs as a direct add of cost to the budget. What we're trying to do is remain stable and use opportunities for finding efficiencies and reorganizations to reinvest in ourselves or in new ways of doing things. An example of this that we'll talk about a little later on is right now we know we are overstaffed in music education. We also know that there's a strategic want for a performing arts coordinator. So if we are able to maintain a level services budget, we can reorganize that staffing to fund a performing arts coordinator without adding any new costs to the budget. That's something we could do under level services. If we have to reduce the budget, that reorganization will simply go to lowering the bottom line, and we'll lose an opportunity to meet a goal. Budget architecture, I think you've seen that before. So just a few notes behind the spreadsheets before we get into some technical discussions. Kind of a recap. Number one, we have a fantastic school district. We are very good at identifying problems and going to work deeply on solving the things that we think need to be improved. But I don't think it should get lost on us that we are number 4 in the state. Okay, we are competing with other high performing districts, and we continue to hold our own. Yes, some years we drop to 10, some years we bounce back up to 4, some years we'll be at 18, but we're always with that top 20 group, right? So we are a top performing district by one measure, and that's the MCAS scores. We know that there's work to do to stay there, right? We went through the November assessment review. Our teams identify areas of concern. They put their teams to work to make improvements, and our staff comes through. They do a great job of maintaining excellence in the schools. I don't think that should be lost when we're having these discussions. So behind the spreadsheets is what we're trying to achieve, and that's continued improvement and quality improvement for our kids. The budget that we're putting before you allows us to maintain our efforts, right? So it doesn't maintain does not mean stand still. It means continue to grow and improve and go to work on some of those goals. I am not going to read you this list, but we have, yeah, it's tough. Sometimes it's a really big screen. Basically, we have a whole list. You heard the program of study. Some of you may have heard the program of studies presentation last week. We have a series of new courses that are coming online at the high school if we're able to maintain our budget. They're interdisciplinary in nature, and they are going to serve our quest to become more authentic and more hands-on in our learning efforts. We're bringing cheerleading online for the first time. Maybe that's been a quest for many years. We're finally able to make good on that. We have a pathway for the performing arts coordination. And I think our teams are working on new and creative ways to expand problem-based learning at all levels. So we don't need an infusion of new funds, but we can't continue to reduce funds and keep making forward progress. And this is just maintenance of best practice and program. Again, a reminder that we have some really good things in place. Electives, I think, are something we're always concerned with. So we do have smaller cohort programs, something like the music electives or Green Team Scholars or Authentic Science Research may not meet our 22 student class size benchmark, but they're programs we want to maintain. I think what we'll be looking at over time as numbers continue to kind of right size is how do we get on perhaps some multi-year modeling for students to be offered courses in a 2-year sequence. So you may not be able to offer every AP course every year. It may be a 2-year wait. We need to let the freshmen know now so they can start planning. You can't just spring that on kids. So I think those things are always on the table and for consideration. But we have a lot of good things going for us, and I think what we're trying to accomplish with this budget is maintaining those going forward. Again, we are carry forward. We're hitting our strategic plan priorities. We are right sizing for enrollment. So the budget we've been talking about that we proposed tonight identified 4 FTE that could be reduced without impacting the program. Those are what we would call an enrollment reduction. Some of them will be solved through attrition, meaning either it's a vacant position without someone returning next year, or someone may be retiring and we may be reorganizing staff to cover it. But it will not impact class size. It will not impact program scope to reduce these positions, and they've gone to help with the bottom line. In fact, I think if we take a look at staffing over time for a second, we've been getting the question a lot, and we're working on a lot of different reports to get there. But our staffing has changed over time. It may not be evident, and I really wish this thing was bigger. But if you look, and I can blow it up, this is giving you all of our budget categories. And I think what this is showing you, if I'm reading it right, is that general ed has declined over time, and special ed and student services position have increased. I can blow it up. We can look at broader categories. I can try.
Yeah.
Let's see. Is that better? So if you look at the general categories, you'll see general ed classroom teachers have declined 7.1%. General ed specialist teachers, art, music, PE at the K-8 level has declined 17.9% over the past few years. While at the same time, our intervention and specialists have grown slightly. Special ed teachers are up 12%. Student services support teachers are up 9%, and big increase in teaching assistants for special education with a decrease in general education. So what we're seeing is reductions for enrollment are being made, but they're made in general ed because that's where enrollment governs heads to students. They're not being made in special education or student services where identified needs and plans determine the number of staffing and type of staffing that you need. So kind of a summary. Funny, I didn't know it was going to come out this way when we ran it. But again, general ed staff on whole, so taking both categories, your specialist teachers and your content or classroom teachers like a 4th grade teacher or a history teacher. Decline of 9%, special ed up 10% in interventions and specialists. It's a small head movement, but producing a large percent change. So here's the interesting thing in this. Our enrollments declined 11.9%. Our general ed staff has declined 9%. When you round it all out, we're reducing 1 FTE for about every 20 students that exit the system. I don't think we can get tighter than that on matching our right sizing for enrollment to the decline in heads. So I think we're there. What's happening is the reductions sometimes are being consumed by different types of student needs that aren't governed by a straight 20 kids in a class or 15 kids in a class and 1 teacher. They're being governed by intervention needs, reading supports, emotional supports, counseling, psychologists, specialized programming where we've seen in other areas is saving us about $1.5 million in out of district placements. So I think we're addressing the need of enrollment. It's been slow. It's not like it all came out at once. It can't because the enrollment doesn't all go out at once. So it's been piece by piece over time. But I think we are doing right by the community to ensure that we are addressing staffing as in response to the declining enrollment. We've been asked to, and we are studying class size, particularly at the secondary. It's complex, believe it or not, it's a pretty complex question. That's where schedule and student choice come into play. You know, here tonight, the idea is we're talking about managing the dollars of offering an AP or music course every 2 or 3 years. May sound very reasonable. It may not sound reasonable to everyone. So I think we would need to take inputs on that if we would be moving to make any of the changes in that line. So that's a little bit on staffing and enrollment. 5-year changes. So where are we? Okay, so where we were in December was talking about the level services budget. I can't keep it that big. Too small. Yeah. So where we were in December was the level services column, which produced a $30 million budget with a $756,000 difference between that 3.5% assessment level that we like to hit and what the real cost is when we remove reserves. So at that point, the $756,000 was the gap or the correction we thought we would be seeking. We've had a couple of conversations at school committee and talked a little bit about about some of the things that we've lost, some of the things we may want, and what would that look like. So what I'm presenting to you tonight is what we're calling the reinstate and stabilize budget. And it has added back, and this is up for discussion, some pieces that we had lost over the past year or so, pieces that we'd lost not to a reorganization or efficiency that we found. So like last year, we reorganized school psychology to realize a staff reduction. Again, function of enrollment, we have fewer students, we can cover caseloads with less people. We completely reorganized the interventionists, made them district-wide and are assigning as needed in schools. So there is no core group at Essex and core group at Memorial. They are district folks and they're getting assigned based on their skills and the students' needs across district if necessary. We were able to realize some savings there. Those things we're not looking to put back. They're better ways of doing things. And we're comfortable with those changes. What we may suggest putting back, number one, is the late bus. I think we got an extra E on there, but putting back the late bus. The more we're doing cross district, I think the more important it is to have. So something like the 5th grade play, if we had the late bus running, it would be facilitating that. So for 20,000, I think we would put back the late bus. I think we need to consider putting back middle school Spanish at this time. I would defer elementary, putting elementary back until we have more study of that. I think it needs to be done in a different way if it comes back. I think it can in the future, but I think it's also going to compete against other wants like health education. So I think there needs to be more work done. So I wouldn't move to put that back right away. And that's something we could realize in the future through other restructurings or using some enrollment savings to fund that. We have 2 what we call small cap lines. So things like we need new chairs and furniture in the school, or we need to have the floors redone in the gym. We need to have the carpets replaced in the auditorium. We call that the facility small cap line. It's a significant expense, but it's not over $100,000. It's usually not over $20,000. But there are little things that need to get done. We used to keep $100,000 in the budget and have a priority list that we would service each summer. That's one of the first things we cut back when we're looking for savings and to close the gaps. So I think that needs a $50,000 infusion to be brought up to its level funding. And the same with the, what we call the curriculum small cap. Curriculum is for curriculum and instructional technology, so it can be for curriculum materials and programs. So we have a curriculum review cycle. We'll be looking at different subject areas. I think science is on deck, math is coming up. So if we need to refurbish those programs, that's the line we use to pay for it. If we might need a smart board because we have to bring a new classroom or a new group online, you might go to that line to fund it. I think we just had made the case during our last override in 15-16 that it was best practice to have those lines fully funded. We're going to advocate for that again tonight. One thing, and I think this is for discussion, but we've placed it here, and it may become unnecessary if we take a different pathway on the fields. But thinking ahead to where, where we're going to be 10 years from now when the new fields are the old fields, we are considering and want input on the concept of a stabilization line dedicated to facilities. So in funding that annually at about $175,000. So it would be a long-term savings account for field replacement or other substantial facilities needs. And then finally, we're doing a lot of extra reporting out of the office. We have always been a little short-staffed in the business department. So we'd be looking to round our half-time payroll purchasing support up to full-time. So our financial analysts can focus a little bit more on analyzing and reporting and a little less on data entry. So that would be the package we would be recommending with the new concept attached to it. And this was discussed in collaboration, and I believe we all walked away endorsing the idea, moving field replacement out of reserves and into a debt exclusion for the upcoming town meetings. So what does that mean? It just keeps wanting to go to that slide.
It's a good slide.
We worked hard on that slide. Funding the fields through replacement. I think I was the hard sell on this because I was having a hard time understanding how this would. It seems like a lot of ask, but I think the details make it a really smart idea. The idea here is if the top line's field replacement through debt exclusion, I think I need to replace that and say reserve reserves for the Essex building project, right? The goal there isn't to pass responsibility for field replacement to someone else. It is to understand that the timeline for Essex Elementary seems to have accelerated and we'll be needing to have a healthy reserve account for taxpayers to get the best potential borrowing deal that it can. So the talking amongst the collaboration team was if you moved the fields to a debt exclusion and preserve the reserves, we're positioning ourselves for 2 years out when we need to go to borrow, and we think we can explain that to the taxpayers. So that's a conversation we need to have here tonight. What it would do, again, preserve reserves, put us in good position for borrowing, leave substantial money on hand in case we run into a problem at Essex between now and when we're accepted into the pipeline. The replacement timeline isn't impacted. As you heard earlier, the bids are going out on schedule. There's language in the bids that does not obligate us to Brook Street should it not be successful in a debt exclusion. And if that were the case, we would pledge to go forward with Highland with available reserve funds, step back, reevaluate, and find a new pathway forward on Brook Street. So we don't half our reserves right out of the gate at the end of this year. That's becoming an increasing concern. So removing reserves is a funding mechanism in the budget, but also leaving ourselves too vulnerable by not having enough reserves on hand, knowing the number of liabilities that we have has been an increasing concern. So with that said, oh my gosh, it's like an automatic default. For discussion, the recommendation would be to go with the reinstate and stabilize and level some hybrid of those two models. So maybe not everything that's on that list, but it's out there for consideration. And then preserve reserve funds for EES borrowing by moving our fields to a debt exclusion model for funding and moving forward to file the first statement of interest on Essex this April. So that's the recommendation. I'm going to sit down, you guys talk and ask questions. And we can go, if you want to jump into specific details on the budget, we can go to different shots of it. But I think everybody's seen it.
So procedurally, I want to see your recommendation on this. There's a little bit of new information here to most of the committee who wasn't in the collaboration group. So do we want to invite the committee to ask their questions and then open to the hearing? I just want to make sure that we know we're going to have plenty of time to discuss this also on 2/7, because that's all we're going to do, basically. But if there are any clarifying questions that we need to ask now, I would invite you to. Go ahead, Jake.
Two clarifying.
Yep.
One is on this slide, the total for that additions line where it's 325 and 450,
It should be up 20,000.
27,000. It looks like it's missing that bottom row.
Okay,
So it's really 357 or 352 and 477.
yes, because I went in and
Okay.
added it late, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just so
And
that
it's
I know
not
where the.
it's not a spreadsheet.
Just so I know where
didn't
those
have
are,
it.
okay.
Yep,
The second, on the idea of the funding the fields through the debt exclusion. My understanding of that suggestion was that it was a way that the towns could offset the operating. So does that imply that we would then take the amount that gets funded through debt exclusion for the fields, we would then use reserves for operating?
that's not how I understood our conversation. I remember that from the first hearing, but the conversation we had was putting the fields on a debt exclusion for the purpose of preserving the reserves and positioning ourselves for Essex. Understanding that we are still committed to removing reserves as revenue from the operating budget.
Okay, so functionally then, if I'm hearing you correctly, the path to fund the fields is not a budget question in terms of the FY24 budget line that we have here.
I think it has to tie
We
together.
got to connect it.
I think it's important to connect it because it's our complete financial package.
And I would,
Because,
oh, go ahead, you first.
oh, and I'm going to do the top and you can get into the
Yeah, that's
details.
fine.
Mainly because if we still commit to fields, if we don't tie them together and say, okay, our default is we need to make good on our projects for Highland Field and Brook Street and spend those reserve dollars, we have to cut $756,000 from the budget because we have nothing to backstop us. So I think it puts us in a more difficult operating mode if we don't see them as a big picture. They're all interconnected in the decisions that we make, I think, but operating does stand alone.
Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just, I think the one thing I would add to that also is that, if we're gonna spend, $1.2 million in the next, let's just say, couple of months, if we do 2 fields, or a year and a half, if we do Highland now and Brook Street next year, and it all comes out of reserves, I think you need a strategy to say, how are you gonna be ready when Essex comes around? And that's a big number. I think a lot of the questions that Anna is rightfully asking, which I appreciate, about annual savings, those numbers are not anywhere in the realm of $1.2 million of cash, and they're on the hope that you get that savings every year. We do see that the savings does materialize, but we try to budget as narrowly as we can. So if you do spend $1.2 million, what is your strategy? I think at that point, this capital, this dedicated line in the budget to say every year we're going to commit $175,000 to go into stabilization, essentially, we're going to have a new line item of spending. I think that becomes a lot more pressing because you want to get back that number more quickly. So that's where the tie-in happens.
So just to follow up then, just to summarize what I'm hearing is what you're introducing is a strategy for us to build our reserves
Yes.
for anything that happens with Essex
Yeah.
or across the district.
And there's one other piece that we might not have made clear, I think is really important to just explain, which is that when we, in addition to having the debt from the capital budget, which is where this would be essentially funded, first has come in below what we told people at town meeting when we passed the vote for the middle school, high school by quite a bit, about half when you factor in the interest rates. And similarly for the Memorial School, it's come in below, plus the spending, how much its cost is going to come in under budget significantly. And in addition, we've structured the debt to decline each year. So we are rolling off each year money where that charge to the taxpayer is lower and lower each year just because of how we structured the debt for a lot of savings, plus a lot of refinancings. That's just passing to the good of taxpayers. Everyone wins. What we're saying is this would allow you to kind of hold that number even instead of just reducing. We never talk about it because it's out of the operating budget. It's a way to say, okay, we would, instead of reducing all the way, we would probably reduce a little bit because paying for the fields through a capital exclusion would still probably cost less than the $335,000 reduction to the 24 budget. Fiscal 24 capital budget's going down 335,000. It's all excluded from Prop 2.5. The annual cost of doing this would probably be not even that much. You would still probably have a reduction. And so taxpayers would still see less charge. I think that's one of the reasons why a debt exclusion makes sense, because we're already saving taxpayers money every year to a pretty healthy margin.
Thank you.
And can I just add to that too, one thing that I want for our committee to understand too, Ann and I were in the collaboration group. So the idea originally came forth when it was mentioned at our last public hearing about using the reserves, toward the operating budget and doing, rebuilding as a debt exclusion, but for the fields. But that was not what was decided. We decided against that. This came about by virtue of a problem solving, and the idea really was supported. And I hope that our town officials will talk to that end tonight. But when we were discussing in collaboration group last week, that, okay, so we've got all of this we're working out and there are plans and strategies in place that we're moving forward with. Also, Abby's been in touch with our financial people, and there's going to be a big pull. What is the plan to put that back? And the presentation really was, we need to build in a strategy to our operating budget. Our town partner said, this is one-time money. This is a capital expense. It would be better for us because then it's out of Prop 2.5 and it's not built into the reset each year if we did this separately from that. So my point in saying that is that this is something that came by way of suggestion from our town partners. And we did discuss, okay, but let's be clear, we're not then talking about using that for this. The problem we're solving is keeping the reserves available for people to be able to save money in the long run with that project. But so I think the genesis of this idea is key. Erica, go ahead.
So I understand most of what you just said, and I understand the rationale of trying to preserve our reserves. But, the big elephant in the room is the fact that it's not much of an elephant, but the town is going to have to vote on this.
Right.
We've already seen one unsuccessful vote for a field in my sort of distant memory. And I'm concerned because 62% of our kids participate in athletics, and athletics don't just happen on Highland. I know that the ownership of Brook Street is not under the schools entirely, but the students who play on it every single day and practice on it every single day are students in our school system. And everything I've read until this point is that the fields aren't safe. So I have some concerns about leaving the funding mechanism for a safety concern up to a town vote that may not have the community backing, because not everyone will have read the Gale report and not everyone has sat through games in these areas or walked on the turf to know that it's really deteriorated and not in a safe condition. So like I said, I understand why we need to be thinking about the reserves, and I understand the needs of Essex Elementary. But I also am really concerned about the safety of the student athletes.
So do you have a specific question on that? Not that I'm saying it's wrong to share, but we're going to have a chance to discuss that. And-
I have a question on that, a follow-up to Erica's, but you answer.
I guess my question, so you guys have spent some time talking about this and coming up with this plan. What type of confidence could we have going into it that it would be great if we knew
That's
this
a
was
great
going to
question.
pass, then we don't have to worry about it, but.
The thing I love about it is that it truly is an opportunity for the voters to simply have their say. This money was budgeted for. The fields are moving forward. We've got bids out right now, right? The fields are moving forward. And I know there was concern last year when it got put off. Is it really going to happen? Is it really going to happen? The fields can happen no matter what. And I don't think that we're saying that if it didn't pass in this way, that Brook Street is definitely off the table even. I think that it's just saying we would need to consider, again, what the financial outlook is. But I think it's a great opportunity to be able to say to the voters, this was an idea that came up because it is something that can save the town's money do you wish to put out a little money, or not a little, but you put forth this money right now to save this later, knowing that we'll have the time to build that story and really explain it? And let the voters decide, but either way, the fields move forward. That's,
But move forward, but it looks to me like, if I'm understanding this correctly, that if it didn't pass the vote, Brook Street would not move forward this summer, which was the time.
that was the question. Yeah, that it's not definite yes or not a definite no. That's my understanding. Am I mis-
On a collaboration meeting, what was concluded, I mean, things could change, it's definitely gonna happen, but we're gonna go with step one is the debt exclusion method. If it doesn't get voted through, then we're gonna use our reserve, but they're gonna happen regardless.
both?
You're gonna need to do both regardless. I think the only question is, so it needs to happen both regardless, because you can't not replace both fields eventually, so they're gonna have to happen. I think it's all the data that we have shared with the community is clear that Highland's gotta happen ASAP, and it will, to your point. Whether Brook happens this summer or a year from now or 2 years from now, we know from the report from Gail that can happen safely, no problem. They did, you may remember, a significant capital repair to that turf. We might have to spend more capital, small capital money next summer if we want to do that. It may not be the best financial decision. And sooner or later, like you said, whether it's this summer, next summer, or 2 years from now, we need to do it. The only question about potentially delaying is, okay, if capital exclusion doesn't pass and the operating budget correction doesn't pass, do we definitely want to do 2 fields this year and face
Right.
potential $756,000 deficit where you're laying off, staff and have 2 brand new fields when you could deal with 1 field right at that time?
It's a much better answer that I was trying to give to Jake's question about they're interconnected, which is if they all fall, it will be a very difficult decision on how to prioritize things going
We're
forward.
going to have
So
something
can I
really.
ask-
Go
What,
ahead.
we have our town partners here. Can I ask, would that vote be a majority vote or is that a 2/3 vote?
That's a
Town
two-part
meeting
vote.
is, I think, 2/3 and
And then
ballot is a
2/3 to the
50.
ballot.
2/3
Then
to
it-
each.
You could
But
correct me if
then
I'm
it's a
wrong.
ballot vote as well.
Ballot is 50% and the town meeting is 2/3, I believe. For capital exclusion or just like an operating override in terms of the percentage votes.
So I want to make sure we have a chance to ask clarifying questions, but also I want to recognize that we have people from the community who've joined us, and we will have a chance to do more of this. So is there anything critical that we need to bring forth before we allow our public?
Just as a point of clarity, so the dollar amount on that, the debt exclusion for the fields is 1.2 million.
Yes.
Yes.
There's no number in, I'm
Yeah.
just saying.
Yeah,
if
that's
there
the
were a
cost.
number
It's
in.
800,000 times 2 field, we only pay half of Brook Street, so that's how you get to 8 + 4 or 1.2.
All right. Thank you all for working with us as we ask a couple clarifying questions and for sticking with us. We'd like to open there's no mic, open the floor up to people. And I would just remind you that if you'd like to make a comment, ask a question, this is a time where we do some give and take. This is what it's about. Pam and Avi will have the bulk of the answers for you probably. Our goal is to get a sense as a committee of what are the kinds of questions being asked, particular when there are town leaders here, what is the sense that they're having moving on these things, because we will have to vote, we will have to continue to deliberate and then vote on to adopt the budget officially on 2/7. So with that, I ask you to please state your name each time, name and town, is that, yeah, name and town, please, each time you speak for the benefit of poor Maria, who has to go through and figure out who everybody is at the end. Who would like to speak? Please.
You knew that was coming through.
I did, but state your name and town, please.
Ruth Green, Town of Essex. So I'm not going to start with questions. I like to let everyone go first so I can do follow-up. I want to start by thanking everybody at the table. Anna, Jake, Kate, Teresa, Chris, Erica, Matt. Being a volunteer myself, I know what a thankless job this can be, and we get beat up a lot. And honestly, quite a room full of volunteers and a couple of paid professionals, but we get beat up and it's not easy. And I appreciate how much time and dedication and commitment you guys put into this. So just a thank you before we continue to beat you up a little bit.
Butter us up.
Exactly.
Please state your name and town.
Annie Cameron, Essex. All right, first of all, it's very hard to hear you, so
Okay.
if you guys could just, not outside voices, but a little louder.
Project.
Maybe I'm just getting old. So I wonder what you're asking in the green column. And is this a debt exclusion only, or is it a debt exclusion and an override? So that's my first question for what are we doing at town meeting this year? And then I want to speak a little bit to some of your questions about, I think the question is, will Essex pass a debt exclusion? And I'd like to address that.
Could we invite, do you mind if I go a little out of order here? Do any of our town leaders want to speak to any of that? I know you did last night a little bit. Brendan, go ahead.
Can I just, a point of clarification?
Yeah.
Both terms have been used. I don't think they're talking about a debt exclusion. That means you borrow money and year after year, the people pay it back until
Right.
the money's gone. It's a capital exclusion, which is in 1 year, everyone says, I'm gonna take this much hit on my tax.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's really important.
Yeah.
Both of those would require, if we're talking about a general operating override and a capital exclusion, they would both require a 2/3 vote, and then the 50%, as Avi said, at the referendum at the ballot box. With respect to whether the town is ready to do a capital exclusion, there hasn't been a lot of discussion yet at the finance committee or the board of selectmen's level about that. I know it was an idea that was presented in the collaboration group. The original idea, which I think came several meetings ago, school committee meeting, was brought up if the town helped fund the fields, either through capital exclusion or the town using its own reserve.
Mhm.
Would the district help by putting its reserves back into the operating budget formula to reduce the apportionments? I understand the answer to that was no. And I understand the proposal that has been discussed tonight is saying the two towns would find a way, whether that's in cash or in a capital exclusion, to pay for their portions of the field. And the two towns would also be doing an operating override, but there would be no use of reserves because the reserves are going to keep the position of the district in a certain place for borrowing for the Essex Elementary School eventual renovation or reconstruction. And so I just wanted to point out that we don't have clarity yet from either the Board of Selectmen or the Finance Committee about that scenario. And it almost sounded like it was being discussed that if there was complete agreement. I'm not saying that there isn't, I'm just saying we don't have an answer either way.
Right.
And that's what I wanted to clarify.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing that. Go ahead, Ben.
Ben Buttrick, Town of Essex Finance Committee. I just wanted to say that we've done quite a bit of work, actually, with the help of Avi, modeling out the override ask for the, because, I mean, irrespective of the capital exclusion question in the field, we're going to need to do an operational override in Essex. And what I'm concerned about is the amount of the override, because basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the anticipated excess above the levy limit for what we're proposing is for the next 3 fiscal years, which we're using 2.5%. I know there's the target of 3.5%, but the town has to live within 2.5%. So what we're modeling out is based on the multi-year model, what an override's actually going to cost. And I'm just worried about that number. I mean, it's a big number. It would add somewhere in the 85 to 90 cents to the mill rate for Essex. And looking at our historical tax trajectory with with overrides that we've had in the past, public safety building, Memorial Elementary, I'm just worried about the capacity of the average taxpayer to absorb it. And so this is just a reminder that looking at the scenarios of that, looking, level services versus reinstate, that what that effectively does is it just adds to the amount of the ask and will add to the mill rate. So as you're deliberating, what you want to put in there, there's a give and take in terms of what the taxpayers are going to bear. And so that's my concern now, is just how do you find that right balance? And I think with the capital exclusion, to sort of taking Brendan's point, the original idea was to pay for it from reserves. And I think what's good about doing a capital exclusion is it gets it out of the tax levy and it makes it sort of a one-time thing. But, by leaving the reserves still, it'll better position, I think, for the rating agencies, when going to borrow for Essex Elementary. So I get that, but it is a balancing act, and just keep that in mind in terms of before putting a lot of stuff in there and building up, what the amount we have.
So I'm Guy Bradford from Essex, and I would just reaffirm what Ben is saying and really caution you about talking about putting back. I understand and I believe in the idea of level services, but by the same token, I think we need to recognize what the taxpayers are looking at. And the idea of this idea of putting back is, I think I would caution you in taking that approach. I really think you need to think about that very carefully. I mean, you made some good, honest efforts in terms of leveling out and taking certain things out in the previous year, and I appreciate that. I ask you to consider very carefully before we think about putting back. And the second thing I'd like to say is, just for the record, our idea was on the debt on the capital exclusion was this was an opportunity to reduce our effort in terms of the amount of the operational override that we would have to do. It wasn't a sort of give and give. It was a give and take.
Can I respond to that? Because initially that is the case, and that was very, very clear. And as Brendan mentioned, the consensus was no. And so this came up as a separate problem-solving mechanism. And I take all of those points, and I know we all are listening very carefully to this. The reason, and I think it's good for our committee to remember, we don't get to determine how the towns choose to raise these funds, right? We vote on a budget, and then the towns choose how they put the funds together. We try to do this in a collaborative way. The reason this conversation even has to come up right now is because if that's not the case, we have to decide if we just move forward with this idea that we would use our reserves for the fields as planned. And then if that happened, then that's a lovely thing. But if that's the case, then we need to have a plan in place for rebuilding, knowing that that is something that responsibly we need to have a plan in place. So that's where the put back starts, is do we put in a stabilization plan? And so that's why we even have to have this conversation now before this. But I take your point very seriously.
And I get your point.
Yeah.
That your job is to do your budget, make your budget.
Yep.
Our job collaboratively is to make sure that we're in a place where that budget is going to make it.
Yes, agreed.
Right.
Thank you.
Can I add that the importance of the reserves is not just for the credit rating, right? The importance of the elephant in the room is the room. So if the roof falls down, and look at it, because some of the ceiling tiles literally look like they might fall down. That is the importance of the reserves. And I think that that's, to me, the most pressing issue, is that there are some significant risks that we are taking the longer we stay in this building, and we need to be financially prepared to address the worst case scenarios.
Yep.
Can I speak once more? I know.
Please,
Oh, sorry.
am I supposed, is there yeah, I think but Annie also, I think I have to try everybody first and then, unless it's in direct response, in which
Well,
case
it
that's
is
a,
actually in direct response. So I just wanted to go on the record saying, I totally support the idea of not using reserves for operating. I
Yeah.
mean, and that's been going on for the last 3 years. So I totally support the need for a correction here. And I would actually support to have a capital exclusion. I think we could actually pay for it in cash, which wouldn't actually add to the taxpayer burden in the town. What I'd like to see is some sort of, give back in terms of the amount of the operational override ask as sort of an offset there, because that would actually be that would be, I think, a good balance. But this is, real-time debate and discussion here. So
Right.
I just wanted to clarify.
sure. I wanted to go to Annie and then I'll take Jake, unless that was indirect.
No, well,
Okay.
it is in response. So Pam, could you put up the 3-year model you shared, or Avi shared at the last meeting?
Yes.
Nina, are you here in person and online? Are you doubly attending this meeting? Yeah.
Are you from- To the web. Send it to me.
So while they pull this up, so my comment on this vein, on this concern, basically from the town. The 3-year, 4-year model that Pam and Avi shared with us at the last meeting has a couple assumptions built into it in order for us to maintain that 3.5% assumption. Right. In that, there are, assuming that, and it sounds like the town is supporting, the stopping the use of reserves for this, and kind of catching us up, given that we've used reserves for 3 years. So assuming that we are able to make, some sort of correction work this year. Actually, I was looking for the.
Yep, and
Oh,
he's
okay, sorry.
got to email it to me and then
Oh,
I got to
perfect,
bring it
okay.
up. So something to look at while we're talking.
So when it gets up here, the forecast for FY 25 and beyond requires us to make reductions and still potentially draw from reserves starting in FY 25. Like, we cannot live within that 3.5%. So the fundamental question, I guess, is if we add stuff back this year, it seems like we're gonna have to immediately next year make cuts again.
Yes.
So there is there's clearly, that's what we talked about the last meeting, a multi-year strategy that needs to happen. I think, if I understand correctly, some of the numbers that Ben might have been talking about, or at least from the Essex perspective, is considering what that multi-year look would be like. It is based off of the $756,000 scenario. There was some discussion about whether other items could or couldn't go in there because we knew that some of these scenario planning typically happens. But that's where we left off at the last school committee meeting, was with the current budget and the 756 and the roll forward. What does that look like? And so at least what I can just say from my own understanding of what I'm hearing from the town of Essex is that they are working on that multi-year assessment. To your point, how does the other columns roll through that? It essentially, it would increase those numbers. But I do know that Essex is already looking beyond just the current year into what, if there is, for example, an override, what would get you at least, I think Ben said, through 3 years.
Yeah. 3 years.
Right, but so I guess, and to Ben's question, what is that 3-year ask, right? Trying to figure out what that number is, right? A reasonable number there. Even with that though, 3 years from now, we're gonna be back in this situation, right? I don't see us getting out of this situation because even if we pre-fund 3 years or so, we're always, and it looks like it increases each year.
Yep.
we're always gonna have this deficit, right? So I guess I keep hearing that we can live within 3.5%, but this says we can't.
We could artificially suppress, make adjustments and small cuts. But you're either going to have to pick a 3-year reset, a 6-year reset, a 10-year reset, because 2.5 is not going to allow you to manage the real school budgets.
I'm not talking 2.5, I'm talking 3.5.
3.5 is the assessment.
So I think the answer to your question is that
But-
generally 3.5 to, on a 10-year basis is, yes, is gonna be not congruous with, a no override, congruent with a non-override, scenario. Yes, and so most communities look at the levy limit as a annual limitation subject to periodic, however often, corrections. So yes, you are spot on. Right now, this model and the conversation we're hearing from Essex is, what would a 3-year correction trajectory look like? When we were in fiscal 16, people were talking, it had been 10 years since the prior corrections. That was a decade. Right now, we're going into our 8th budget cycle. So we've been doing 10 and 8 years.
Mhm.
So the purpose, now at the 8th year is to say, before this number gets too big, do we want to wait to the 10th year? Do we want to deal with it now? I think even a year ago, we said, let's deal with it with the fiscal 24 budget. Either way, you're right. This is a structural deficit for districts that invest at level services. And I think we've had several conversations in the past about communities that are similar to ours do tend to invest at 3.5 to 4% per year. That's level services. Below that is cutting. So that's kind of the structural sandbox that we play in. I remember at some of the FinCom meetings we've heard about, there people have been looking at other communities, doing Department of Ed research and seeing that is something that is not just an MERSD situation. So you are correct. The question is, how many years are we looking to hold out for?
So I'll bring back an idea that I put forward and didn't get much traction, but I would suggest that we have a part in this too, that we can't just be looking on the funding side, but we have to look on the spending side of it as well. And whatever the towns can give us for time, we should be using that time wisely, or else year 4, we're gonna be looking at cuts again, and we're not gonna be prepared to do that wisely, right? It'll be like short term, gotta make the cuts. Or if if any part of this correction fails, then we're doing short-term cuts. So I would suggest that we play our part and prepare for options for when that money runs out.
Can you clarify what you mean by that?
Means we have to look at our program. It means we have to look at how we can potentially live in a slightly smaller year-to-year growth. But it takes time to play that out.
I also just saw like health insurance numbers, which account for a huge percent of our budget, and I'm hearing that those are going up 8 to 9% per year. And we are continuing to retire employees and continuing to pay for their retirement.
I'm not saying it's easy, and I don't have the answer. All I'm saying is, we should consider our part in this as well.
I think what I've learned about this over time is if we do, say we decided to restructure everything for an initial savings of $750,000. As soon as you implement that reset, your growth number is still going to be the same the next year. Because it's not an expansion, it's a growth of it's the growth of those variables that won't change. Like, we can't change the healthcare. You're not going to, we're working on the contract, but that's collaboratively bargained. So that's going to have to come in competitive with other like districts. So we can shrink the program, but once you've shrunk it, you're right. Just like once you get an override, you're right back to where you are in the following year, which is you're going to grow at 3.5 or 4%. You may lower the baseline, but you're on the same trajectory.
Unless you're cutting every single year.
Right. Right.
And to be clear, I'm totally in support of our proposed budget here. Although it looks like we have a new alternative this time, so we have to talk about that. But all I'm saying is, looking out, I don't see how we get out of this cycle.
I don't think we're intended. I think that we're getting to a point, or at
I
least what I
keep hearing
heard last
Pam, I
night.
keep hearing you say, which we need to get out of the cycle, and that's what I'm trying to
Well,
figure
the
out.
cycle of,
The annual.
excuse me, but the debate we're having here and the positional conversations that take place, there needs to be a commitment to, so are we going to do a 3-year reset override and just accept that that's the reality of it? Are we going to not want to take on a 3-year, but do a 10-year reset override? Because that's the reality of it. I feel that I've said it before, I will restate it. I think there's a conflict between the wants and needs of the two communities that play out at this budget table. And we don't have the answer to it because we're having a pretty in-depth conversation about the Essex needs tonight. I'm not hearing anything about where Manchester stands. I think we heard at collaboration that it's the 3-year reset for small overrides would be preferable and predictable, and that we should work in that manner. But I don't think anyone who's been managing the budgets for an extended period of time, looking at what happens in other communities, there's a structural problem statewide in how you're funding schools. We're not going to solve it in Manchester, Essex, but we have to come up with a system here that doesn't draw down so much time and energy of the district to solve a problem that doesn't have a one town or regional solution.
I want to let Matt speak, and then I do want to open it back up to the public, because this is a public hearing. Remember the public? Remember that? Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
2 parts. For the small cap, what's that dollar?
We had been funding them out of the last override at 100K each line.
So anything under 100 is considered small.
Oh.
Sorry, that's my question.
Oh, I'm sorry,
It-
15 to 20?
We
5?
typically have it be around 20, up to about $25,000. It's unofficial, but yeah.
Okay, because I'm just thinking like in terms of the importance of putting stuff back, like this building is one gigantic small cap. Like,
Yes.
in addition to needing a new building, we also, things are gonna keep breaking in this building. That are gonna, like, so that's my comment in conjunction with, like, also needing a new building, is that a small cap line is incredibly important, at least on the facility side, for a building that is old and in disrepair like this building. And secondarily, you know, the kind of leading up to the budget last year, through public comment at our meetings, and then also at the Manchester Town meeting, like, the most common refrain I heard was about the world language bill, and about the cuts to it, like that. I was surprised at how much that was on top of it. Is eliciting the constituency, like, I know middle school Spanish is a different version of that, and that's a different, but if we're gonna respond to what I heard the most frequently at the community, at the town meeting, as well as at the public comment, I think that putting that back into the budget is responding to what the community has told us is really important. I know it's in a different version with middle school Spanish versus the world language program as it was, but it's still like, so just a response to that, the putback is that how much I'm in favor of getting back things that the community wants and that this building, in addition to other areas, definitely needs.
Thank you, Matt. Annie, you've been so patient. Would you like to say your name and town?
Okay, so I just want to
This is
talk
Annie
about
Cameron from Essex.
sorry, Annie Cameron. The politics of town meeting, right? So what I'm hearing right now is possibly a debt exclusion, not a debt, sorry, a capital article for 400 core fields. That's one article. And an additional article for an override at, is it 1.7? That was the,
The
1.2.
the restabilize is 1.768, so if you're
The
looking at
fields are
the
1.2,
yep,
capital,
Yeah.
sorry, Brendan, capital exclusion.
Right.
And the
And the
potential
operating.
override would be a split of, hold on,
just big numbers, good.
Level services was 1.4. The reinstate
1.4
stabilizes. were
approximate because they haven't been
Right.
recalculated for the small adjustments we need to make to the ads line, or 1.7.
Okay, so 500,000 at least, maybe in a debt exclusion. And then, because I just want to give you some context.
Yeah.
We're fresh off of started building a public safety building. We built a high school, that debt's coming up, I think in 24, paying for Memorial School. This is what Essex is bearing,
Yeah.
and what Essex doesn't benefit from the two schools in a way that the Manchester voters do, right? I mean, Manchester voters use that for a lot of different things, We have this school, which we love, even though it's beaten up and battered, it's our school, we love it, and because it's more about the people that are in it, but, and that's coming up for a vote in a couple of years, maybe, 2, 3. I just am worried about this ask at town meeting, because I think it's a lot. And I know that I'm always the person who looks at your columns and says, you know, I don't, the bus, the late bus, get rid of that kind of thing. No one ever uses it. Figure out a way to get kids back and forth. I just think, come on. I mean, we've been fighting that stupid fight for years and we're losing. I would look at some of those other the stuff in that column, sharpen your pencils, see what you can do. But, you know, this is the tension, right, that you have right before passing a budget. This is the fun part. Really.
Says the woman who's no longer on the committee.
I love this part.
I know you do.
And I love collaboration. And, you know, I just worry about what we're asking for and how we sell it, because that's a lot to ask in a year. You're asking for 400 and then that's a lot of money. And I worry about passing it because I will be helping you try to do that. And I want to feel like you're all behind the school, that you all believe in this, that you're all behind it. And I don't get that feeling yet. So, and I'm also like, ooh, that's a lot of money. So I know that I'm the person who, you know, really does come at you about that middle column, but I would really re-examine that and ask, are these absolutely necessary? And for stabilization, it bothers me that we're saying we're going to have a dedicated stabilization funding line when we already have a stabilization line. So
Saying
it's
contribution.
It's
different. I mean,
depleted.
and how sacred is it really when we're desperate? We always raid that fund because we're like, what else are we gonna do? So, and this, I did want to, I do like looking at this. Does this take into account what happened tonight, what you talked about tonight?
This assumes successful debt exclusion.
Oh, it does.
This one does.
Okay.
This one does not.
Yeah, that's the old one.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and 3 million. I think you said, what, 10% you'd like to have? What is your number that you'd like to have for reserve?
We like to have in Manchester for the town, 10%.
And for school committee, you always had a number in your head.
My understanding of the way, and this is just me. I'm
Yeah.
not speaking, and I'm Ann Harrison from Manchester. The way our town budgets work, particularly in times when there was significant inflation, was we would be going along, we would have an override, and we would put money in various stabilization funds, the fire truck fund, or this fund, or that fund. And over the years, we would put less and less and less into those. And maybe we would spend something from those in a way that it wasn't originally intended. And then we would be looking at another reset. And then, you know, whether it was because of health insurance problems, which we had to address by shifting more and more of the cost onto the employees. Or, you know, we happen to not have a contract for heat, electricity, and yeah, it gets into it.
Yeah.
And the basic, so I never had a real sense that yes, the town has a reserve. And the reserves go up and down. Currently, we have a policy saying it should be 10%. We had some good years when inflation was running under 2%, and we built up our reserves beyond the 10%. And we've been spending that back down.
Yeah, and I just want to give you some context in terms of Essex. We have not had an override since, I think, 2005. We had an unsuccessful override in 2012. I will have a lot of arguments about why they didn't pass, but we had a correction in 2015, I think. So, you know, I don't think that the ask is unreasonable in terms of, you know, of asking for an override. I just want you to have the context in which you're asking. And I will tell you that Essex likes to pay its bills. So if someone said to you, we have a, you know, capital thing for a year, it's this much, you know, Essex usually passes those things without, and I think people would agree, we pass those things without really much problem. But I think that, you know, you need to think about the politics of what you're asking at town meetings. And I would tell you that I do think that the capital item would pass, but you're mixing it up now with this debt exclusion, which is kind of complicating things. So blah, blah, blah. That's all I'm gonna say.
I think that's really helpful, and we'll go to Nina and then Antonella, but I just want to, I will leave this as well with, I am mildly concerned that the two asks is conflating things, and part of what I really need to hear to be able to make my decision as a committee member, my vote for a budget at our next meeting is going to be what we think of that, because it's going to make a difference how I feel about a stabilization put in. So that's really helpful to me. Nina, go ahead.
Hi, Nina McKinnon, Essex. I appreciate the time. I would agree with Annie, the late bus, just the kids being there, line driving, that road's slow right now. I wonder who's on the buses. This field thing is way too confusing. I've sat in 5 years worth of meetings. So to Erica's point, the field is a safety issue. I have a daughter who is excited to play a field sport. People are for the first time ever, and she's having friends say, be careful because you don't know which divots to avoid. So I was probably my first public meeting was in 2020 when I called in, and this two fields cost $1 million. So we're now at 1.2. We've spent money to replace it. I guess at that point, I remember questioning how expensive fields cost. But we had the money, I thought, aside. So I'm actually very confused on this whole field thing. I don't want us to keep rehashing it. But I do think it's one of those things, if people have any sense that we're not fixing Highland and maybe add in Brook Street, but Highland, and you're asking for their money, like, it's just putting the wrong, it just makes it very confusing. To Annie's point, if it's a one-time cost, like can Manchester put in, I guess that they're now $800,000, they used to be a $500,000 field, they're now $800,000 field. You know, can Manchester and Essex put that money in? I think you'd have people understand what they're paying for, and they say yes. I have two other comments if I'm allowed.
Go ahead.
With that, I guess I am curious with the creativity. I'm not for it, but at the same time, to what Jake said, we have a spending problem. We have a revenue problem. There's no 3.5, there's a 3.5 here, but the reality is our budget's 4. Our budget's even 4.5, it's 5. It is not 3.5. We're not even trying to pretend we're near the levy limit. I've been in other schools where you see advertisement in gyms if people don't want them on the field. I've been to fields where you see advertisements on the fields. I've seen websites, I'll say about the website, that even have advertisements on it. What are we doing to create some revenue? Because right now, we can't afford, like, to what everyone just said, we either have to, from the town side, from the school side, we have to be just brutally honest as to the cost of what we're doing, without using the phrase level services, without people talking about enrollment, but just at the end of the day, the climate right now is that everyone in both towns had major assessments to their houses. People are concerned about their jobs. I know other areas are looking at 2% increases for salaries, where we need to be looking at really carefully to think of the bigger picture, because it's a lot of language, not a lot of people listen to it. And I think it's concerning, because if we don't pass it, I know that creates a ripple effect that's also not great, but it also puts up, we're just gonna be here 3 more years. We're just gonna keep being here. Do we have to, what Pam said, look at the program. The program worked. It's a great school, it was a great school system 10 years ago. I'm actually old enough to say it was a great school system 35 years ago when I lived in the area, but we couldn't school choice, not lived in town. So it's been a great school system for 52 years. There's different models we can look at. And do we have to actually, can we ask you as the town, ask the school committee, school, look at other types of programs that might have different efficiencies? Because right now, all I hear is we have to stick with the model.
So do we want to respond or do we want to take? Okay, as a thought exercise. Thank you. Thank you. Antonella?
Antonella Muniz, I live in Essex. So as someone who really cares about the district and my town, I really paid a lot of attention to the budget talks. But I'll tell you, it's super confusing. And so I'm just wondering if there is some way, somehow, in order to make it easier for residents to understand what we're trying to do and how you're trying to do it without using a lot of vocabulary. It might be an impossible task, but I think you would get people to say yes to the bird ride, if that's what you're asking, if you could lay it out. Because people are just like, more money, what? No. So, but when you actually look at what you're actually asking for, the consequences of not getting what you're asking for, I think that lays it out crystal clear. And I think last year, I sat down with Teresa and I actually rewatched, I think, 2 budget, like 3-hour.
You're dedicated.
And I had to like pause and rewind. It's very complicated. No one else in Essex is gonna do what I did. So I think that can really help us. That's my first point. I have a second question. Is there potential that you're going to hire a school psychologist in the future? And my reason for asking is because at one point, I thought it was a good idea to have a school psychologist and an adjustment counselor. And now here we are post-COVID, our kids have been isolated.
Yep.
Social, emotionally, they're like dumpster fires. And we got rid of the school psychologist. We here in Essex have a new, well, I think she's the intern because I think Susie is, here. So now there's a new adjustment counselor who's lovely, but I felt like that was so short-sighted and I was shocked. And I just want to know what the decision-making behind not replacing Deb Welling, and to re-ask that question, are we going to replace the school psychologist? Because we thought it was a great idea before pandemic. And here we are after pandemic and we're like, yeah, no. So I don't understand. So if someone can explain that again.
Sure, and I'm going to try to
Sure.
do it quick and simple. No, not at this time, because we didn't remove the school psychologist, but we right-sized the number of school psychologists that we carry to match the declining enrollment. At one point, we had shared psychology between the 2 buildings, but then we escalated our enrollment about 250 kids. Elementary has come down now. So the school psychologist caseload is 1 to 400. It's in line with recommended standards. And Dr. Penoyer works between both buildings. The school psychologist is more dedicated to testing and assessment. Some of what was happening here at Essex were services beyond the scope of the person's actual role. So we have to right-size that as well. And both schools retain their 1.0 adjustment counselor. It's consistent with how we're running the middle high school. So no, there is no plan to reinstate that.
That's a shame. And it's
I understand.
detriment.
Understand.
I'll speak to your first point, though. Agreed that it is confusing, and it's confusing for us. The one thing I would say to that is that while up until the point where we're deciding on this, that like we're having this discussion mostly among us, except when we're interacting like this. But this year will be different in that we're potentially going to have an override. There will have to be a planned way of telling the story, explaining what it is, what the costs are for, and really being able to defend whatever that is, if that is the case. So that will be part of it. That's in the tactics. Right now, we're in the, what are we even going to be asking for here? And one thing that is concerning me too is the idea that we're looking at these options, but also, and hearing about the concerns about town meeting, we're conflating two asks at this point, and also the possibility that Essex is going to be asking for a 3-year buffer. So all of this at once, I think, is if it's feeling overwhelming for the people in this room, it's certainly going to be overwhelming for the people outside of this room. So I don't know.
And Teresa,
If we can-
I'd add that we asked for the buffer a year ago and got spent last year. You know, the town of Essex put $50,000 in to try to create a little buffer. It was used in the year. So again.
That was, I think that's an
another
important,
item
yeah.
that
They didn't use it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We use free cash.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I apologize for the
Sure.
record. I'm very sorry.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to make public comment? There's like 2 people left. Yeah. Please.
I'm Sarah Wolf. I'm from Essex.
We miss you.
I want to echo what Ruth said at the beginning, which is a thank you to the school committee, thank you to the town select members and the finance committee members, and to the members of the public who are here tonight. Thank you to the town of Essex for deciding to look ahead 3 years. I think that's really smart now. I think it's hard, especially we've been behind in the apportionment for a couple of years. So I wish we would have looked ahead 3 years ago, back when apportionment was leaning the other direction, because that would have been a really good time to be planning ahead. But I'm glad that we're planning ahead now. Anyway, hindsight. My 2 cents. I did write some things down. One is that what I heard in my 7 years on the school committee is that parents and constituents and the majority of voters are consistently asking for more from our schools, not for less. They want their children to be supported. They want them to be in school. First of all, I was on the school committee, but they would really like them to be in school.
They do like
So I
that.
think- Yeah, I like that. And while they're there, we'd like them to be safe. We want them to be supported academically, socially, and emotionally, not only throughout the school day, but also as a wraparound service after school, before school, and on weekends. They want a variety of classes to be offered, particularly in high school, but also enriching opportunities for the lower grades, like the school play that's happening now, art, music, etc. People want, not only do they want before school and require before and school and after school care. I was astounded when I got here and there was no before school or after school care at Essex. There is now. But people are really looking forward to that so that they can maintain their professional lives and care for their children and raise their families here. They want help ensuring, they also want their children to be safe on the field when they're doing their after school activities. And they want help ensuring available transportation to and from those activities. And I'm going to disagree with my fellow town residents, Andy and Nina, who both argued against the late bus. I'm actually pro late bus, and I remember Pete's like April coming to school committee and very passionately talking about the need for a late bus, as it really provides it's really important to provide equity so that all of the children in the towns can attend all of the activities after school that they need to attend. And I know that it was brought in also as a way for kids with the play, and I think there are other ways that it could be used. I think bringing it back the way it was before probably doesn't make sense, but I think bringing back opportunities for after-school transportation do. So the late bus and also for transportation. Many people are also looking for early childhood care. I know our preschool full. I advocated for expanding the preschool even more. That could actually be a source of revenue. And it's likely that the state will be requiring schools to provide universal free preschool opportunities in the near future. So that's another thing that we need to look for. I think it's time for everybody to recognize that the school district is providing much more than the 3 R's of education, and that families are relying on public schools for an increasing level of support services well beyond just academics. Our school doesn't have a spending problem. There's a statewide problem with the way schools are funded. And just as other districts have to figure it out, we have to figure it out. So as Prince was saying, we could have the 3-year or the 5-year or the 10-year override situation. But I don't think that cutting any of our programs is going to be the solution. And I think that we need to leave it up to our educational professionals, our principals and our superintendents and our soon-to-be hired director of curriculum to decide what programs are best for our district. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sarah. Anyone else have public comment tonight? There's one left. I'm looking right at you, Christopher. That's a good comment. That was Christopher Wool from Essex, seconding his wife.
Once you get through everybody, Teresa, I have
Are you going to be a wet blanket at the end of, no, I'm just,
well, I'll go.
please go ahead.
Just, I kind of.
This is Ruth Perrine in Essex. I'm sorry. You got it.
Just to echo a little bit about what Ben said and then kind of elaborate a little bit more. Tonight, I guess the building back in, the reinstatement of the late bus, the middle school Spanish, the kind of the middle column there. For me, felt like a little bit of a curveball this evening. So as we've been, Ben and Guy have spent an enormous amount of time working on this 3-year plan for the override, and we have a number that we've been in the community, and you know, since last year, we've been talking about the potential need for an override this year. So for the last year, we've been talking to residents slowly and kind of introducing this idea, so it's not a big surprise. But as we've been working meeting after meeting, kind of with a number that we had in mind, tonight's curveball with adding that back in does change this kind of the scenario of what we're going to be selling. So then to Annie's point, all of a sudden the number is bigger and it does get a little more scary. So some of the things we've discussed feels like it's all out the window back on the table for further discussion. So, and then to what Matt said about he heard from constituents that, hey, we want Spanish back or whatever the foreign language is. And I think when I hear that, I agree, I heard the same thing, but I also think that was the thing that was on the chopping block. So that is the thing that people are going to talk about because they don't want to lose it. So I think we just have to be mindful of both towns, the budget, and just, I caution you on that column because it is going to increase the overall number that we're looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, I'm not trying to monopolize the conversation, but I will just reply to that too. This is the difficulty, and I've felt the tension, I'm sure others have too, of different timelines, and that you guys are trying to nail down a number so you can do your town budget as well. But we're still in budget development at this stage of the game. So nothing is solid until it's approved on 2/7. So that tension of the timing is really difficult, no matter what, especially in a year when there's an ask like this, when there's a different kind of ask. And so, you know, clearly our committee has a lot to discuss and go through and decide upon, you know, what our priorities are, keeping in mind that, you know, in our public hearings, we hear from the people who come, and most of the time it is people who are involved in the budget discussions, you know, within the two towns. And we have to consider that heavily, and we also have to consider the other inputs that we have also. So I thank you for the open and honest discussion and input. Is there any further public comment? Oh, yeah, I'm going to go in person and then I'll go online. Go ahead, Ben.
Okay, Ben Buttrick, Town of Essex. I just, one of the things that I wanted to say is I don't think we have any choice in Essex but to do an operational override, simply because we haven't talked much tonight about the apportionment and the way that the apportionment is impacting, it's distorting, you know, the percentage increase each year that the town has to pay. And none of us can do anything about that, right? I mean, that's just the reality of the formula. And so, you know, every year, part of the reason why it's really contentious in Essex is because we literally starve our town budget to accommodate the higher apportionment. And so the operational override is factoring in the impact of apportionment over the course of the next 3 years. And we realize that that's a balancing act, back to kind of Jake's point about like, well, why 3 or, you know, 4 or, you know, we factoring in Essex Elementary. I mean, that's going to be a vote for the residents. That's going to be a debt exclusion. And I think we may have a problem come year 4, back to that point, without sort of some austerity in terms of, but it does buy some time to actually figure out how to do that. And I think just things get murky too, if you're trying to, you know, pre-fund a set of increases, you know, going to you you say, you know, we can't go out any farther, but 3 years sort of felt like the right number. So.
Thank you. And sorry, to be clear for the people at home, I'm taking in-person comment and then I will turn to online to see if anybody would like to make public comment. Go ahead, please.
Just a question.
This is Annie Cameron
Annie
from
Cameron.
Essex.
A 3-year, is that saying in year 4, you're gonna go for another override? Oh, that's not, that'll never happen.
The
So let's
discussion,
be realistic.
That's the two
That's
towns
Separate
outlooks.
override, right?
the discussion at the table, as I understood it and walked away, was 10-year horizon overrides are inevitable. They're large and they're cumbersome. Does it make more sense to have systematic planned 3 or 5-year overrides because the amount is smaller and more control?
So this is
So-
the Gregg proposal, which was smaller, discrete. Yeah, so would that be in this, at the same level? Or is that, I guess I'm just wondering, you know, okay, so you have this big ask this year. You don't have to even answer the question. Is the ask in year 4 smaller and a smaller number? And how long will that last? I mean, these are just questions that are gonna come up.
Yeah.
Smaller and, you know, expected, and then where is the ethics debt exclusion coming in? So, I don't know, it's just.
And there aren't answers. And, you know, part of what I heard at the table is I heard, it might have been Brendan saying, you know, town of Essex, historically, you know, that's not the flavor of the town to do this, that what I heard was, you know, Manchester would probably reliably be able to support a 3-year cycle of this. And what I heard was Essex leaders saying, don't think so, not
Well-
likely. But again, I'm not saying that that's right or wrong.
Traditionally, it isn't,
Tradi-
but
Have we
home
changed?
is a big, different world.
Right.
So, you know, do we start having the conversation from, but it has to come from these guys. right?
That's
And you have
my
to
point.
have,
Yes,
these guys have to be behind it and have a very good story to explain.
Right.
In terms of what Antonella is saying.
Right.
What's the narrative behind that?
Right.
So.
and one of the asks has been gently and less gently, this work would be a lot easier if we knew that the two towns had some sort of general agreement on how we want to do this in a long-term strategy. This is the first time any long-term strategy has come up in recent years. So this is the beginning of it. And I don't think we can commit to anything at this point. This gives a little breathing room to see, okay, well, what are the options down the line?
And what,
the
and
best
what's it
case
say?
scenario.
What does it give us?
Right.
The district. I mean, I love the fact you gave us that whole educational overview because it's about curriculum, what we offer. I do believe that we produce a great educational product. We got 4 kids that are doing very well. They're all products of this school district. And so I believe in this education. I just think we need to be talking about it a lot more about what are we asking for this year? And then like, there's a bigger story than just this year.
Yeah.
So happy to work with you guys on what that is, but I just want to be clear about.
And I'm
that.
gonna, can I offer
Please.
something as my,
Yeah.
so my responsibility is to advocate to the communities for what I think is in the best
Yeah.
interest of the district, as informed by our teachers and our leadership team and inputs from the parents. So I'm fielding more questions like, why can't we put back the psychologist? Why can't we put back all of the, we want, to Sarah's point, we hear about investments and what aren't we offering and why can't we do more? So trying to be directed, I'm not saying that I couldn't advocate for it if we were having a different conversation. I believe the school, and this is kind of my message after watching this for many years, and I may be stepping outside of my realm, but you're asking the school to solve a 2-town problem. And I believe part of the confusion comes because we're entering into parts of this conversation that aren't ours to enter into and trying to solve the issues that reside within town finance. We're here advocating, I'm presenting to the school committee, I think this a sound, responsible budget going forward. I don't think it's bloated. It doesn't get back everything everybody wants to see. I'm more than prepared to make well-reasoned cuts, and they won't be cuts that everybody agrees with, but they're going to try to be in the best interest of the greatest good. I think the green line gets you some security and some stability going forward. and tries to back us out of this conversation about reconciling what the two towns want out of their schools. And they are very different things. I'm a little confused about Friday because I exited feeling that the group wanted us to advocate for the capital exclusion as a way to preserve reserves for Essex. If I misunderstood that, I will own it. But I don't think I misunderstood that, and I think now we are getting confused, because my initial concern was you're adding another vote and another explanation. That sounds confusing. People felt comfortable, I thought, in that meeting, that the taxpayers would understand the greater good of saving money on a 30-year debt as opposed to. We do not have a spending problem in comparison to how other districts run. If you take the entire per pupil expenditure chart and run a tally of year-to-year expenditure, Ben, I know you did it. It's about 3.8%. You want us to be something that we can't. We're trying to give you our best effort to give you 3, 5, 10-year windows, whatever you choose for the financing. But I'm not hearing a lot of inputs that we need to undo the entirety of the district, change the middle school model, eliminate programming. We can look at restructuring, but I need direction from this group to tell me you want me to investigate reorganizing middle school model, reorganize administration, and I'll come back to you with options. Options are easy. It's the consequences of it. You're hearing feedback from two people on what I think are small issues in the scheme of our whole program, psychology and Spanish. And they linger. People are not pleased with our reductions. We're having conversations about how do we stay competitive with private schools. Well, there are a lot of things that we can do, and one of which is maintaining small class size, because people go to schools where they have, 10-to-1 class size ratios, or a 5-to-1 overall faculty student adult to student ratio in the school. We're not there. We're not trying to be there. But those are things that we're centering these conversations around, but those are the things that keep us successful and competitive. So it's really up to this group to decide where you want your schools to go. And I can bring you a whole bunch of scenarios. I think we've put out there what we think is in the best interest of the district. And now it's up to you guys to make some decisions.
Okay. I know Matt had something. I've got to get to the online people. Okay, all right. And then I will look back here again. So is there anyone online who would like to make public comment? If so, please put your name and town in the chat. I can't see the chat anyway.
Chat was closed.
Oh, the chat is going to be reopened momentarily.
Chat should be open.
Chat should be open at this point. If you'd like to make public comment, please put your name and town in the chat. While we wait to see if anybody would like to do that, if there's anybody on the phone, please feel free to unmute yourself and say your name and town.
People unmute themselves.
Yes, they can. Okay, I see one in the chat. That's Jody Harris from Essex. Go ahead.
Thanks, Teresa. I guess one of the things that I just heard, which is a little bit disturbing to me, is that we can't, as a public school, stay competitive with private schools. That's not our mission. Our mission is to provide the best education possible in our public school district while living within our means. And I think that one of our issues right now is that we're outspending our revenue. And when you do that, you're never going to catch up. In this economy, if we have huge asks in override or capital projects, and we want to build a new school in a couple of years, I think we're pushing it. And I think that I'm concerned that we're not looking at tweaking programs to live within our means. We're outspending what we can afford, and we can only ask people so many times to increase their taxes in their town. Both Manchester and Essex need each other. We needed each other in 1999 and in 2000, and we need each other in 2023 and 2024. Neither one of us can stand alone. So I think we need to sharpen the pencil. I agree with Annie, we need to sharpen the pencil. I agree with Nina. We need to look at the program. You know, you can't continue to feed your family filet mignon if you don't have the money to pay the grocery bill. So you may just have to change what's on the menu. So I'm concerned. I support the district. You know, I've always supported the district from the beginning. But at this point, we're continuing to outpace what we have for revenue with spending. And as Ben said, we can't continue to starve our town budget. And that's what we do year over year. So again, I just want to have everyone take a little bit of a step back and see what we can do with programming to help with the spending. I know it's a systemic problem as far as how schools are funded through the state, but it's our problem. It's our problem today. It's our problem next month. It's our problem in May when we go to town meeting. And it's something we have to solve. I don't know the answer, but I think we've got to bring ourselves back to what do we have in our revenue stream? What can we afford? And how are we going to retrofit a program, not, if whether it's this program or a program change, how are we going to retrofit that to make the best program that we can afford for two towns, and not say that we're trying to compete with private schools. That's not our job, is to compete with private schools. And our job isn't to provide special education comparable to Landmark. That's not our job either. Our job is to provide the very best education we can within our means. And we've got to start doing that. Bringing overrides, it may or may not pass, but what's going to happen in the end is people are having real stressors on their own personal financial positions, between electricity costs, inflation, add all of the things, and then say, hey, by the way, we're going to increase your taxes on an average of $650 per taxpayer. I think we're on a slippery slope here, and I think we've got to decide how we're going to handle it going forward. Thanks for all your hard work. I know it's a tough time and budget season is ugly, but you're going to wade through, and I hope we can do it collaboratively.
Thank you, Jody.
I just want to clarify, the
Go ahead.
private school reference goes back to the study we were asked to do on enrollment and why we may be losing more students to private school. Right. It's not an advocacy that we should be competing with them, but it's been raised at the school committee level as a concern. Yeah. So just wanted to clarify that, Jody.
I'm pilfering Kate's thing here. I see Kathy Bellata in Manchester.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, thank you. Again, I'm going to add my thanks I'm Kathy Bellata. I'm a new member on the Manchester Select Board. And this is my first budget cycle, so I'm here to listen and learn. And I definitely appreciate the complexities that, everybody's been dealing with it. This is the tough part of the job, one of the toughest parts. But I had a question to follow up on, Pam, a comment that you just made within the past few minutes. You mentioned that you were looking for feedback from the towns as to whether or not the team should be looking at any type of restructuring of programs or administration. And I just wanted to ask, when is the last time that a restructuring option had been looked at? As I said, I'm a new member to the board, and I'm just not familiar with the history, how long ago it's been since that has been looked at. Thank you.
Sure. I think the last time if we're looking at administration, we did a fairly extensive study when we were looking at the high school principalship to see if we should keep if we should go with a combined middle high school leader, or keep one middle school principal and one high school principal. and assistance. And the belief was at the time, and I think it would still hold after watching, is that if you want to have a middle school with a middle school philosophy, you're best positioned to hire someone with that expertise, because typically when you go with the middle high school model, the individual has an expertise in one area or the other, but it's more often than not, the middle school doesn't get the level of attention that it needs. And we were trying to build a middle school. So I would say that was back in 2012.
Okay. So, and as far as the program restructurings,
We we do program restructure, targeted program restructures annually. We do program reviews on a cycle and get external third-party inputs about where we might be able to find efficiencies, what's working well, what needs improvement. They do financial reviews associated with them, and we usually have them report out to school committee and post. So we have a cycle of review and inputs.
Okay. Thank you for that. I just, you know, my background is not in education, but I do have a fair number of teachers in my family, and, you know, listen to them talk about the struggles. I would encourage the board to plan a restructuring, not restructuring, a structural analysis on the administration periodically. If it hasn't been done in 10 years, honestly, that's a really long time between a thoughtful administrative analysis, no matter what type of organization that, you know, you're running. That's a really long time. The world has changed a lot, even in the past 3 years, let alone the last 10. So I would just advocate for giving that some consideration, because it can uncover some efficiencies without hurting the programs. So just a thought there. Thank you.
Can I just add to Kathy?
Yep.
What's true?
Yes.
I got your first name correct. Just in case it wasn't clear to either you or to anyone else who's listening in, and this is, sometimes we have these budget slides that we go through with a familiar audience. We don't always read through a lot of the same items, but restructuring of our spending profile, which, as you know, is primarily staffing, is something that we do annually as part of our budget process. And if you look at the budget proposals for each of the last several years, we've had some type of staffing restructuring in just about every single budget cycle. I know Pam was talking about the administrative level, which I think might have been your question, and principals. We did a central office administrative restructuring that yielded significant better outcomes, but also savings. We've also had some of the restructurings that we heard about at this meeting in terms of things like psychology support. In prior years, we've had other restructurings of just about every line item, including shared services between the elementary school based on enrollment. So there are quite a number of different types of restructurings that are outside of the principal structure, and maybe that I just want to make sure you were aware of in answer to your question.
Thank you very much for that. And it was helpful because it helps me clarify my ask. There is that continuous improvement analysis that's performed that I absolutely can see the team is doing, without a doubt. You guys are working so hard on that continuous improvement and looking for every penny where you can find it. But periodically, you want to take more of a transformational look at the program and at the administration, right? And it sounds like you did do that 10 years ago. 10 years is a long time. And where you're going to be, you know, building a new school in a couple of years, I just think that's a long time between transformational analysis, and you may want to plan that into your model over the next year or so. You're going to have another big ask in the not too distant future, and I think the townspeople will be looking for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I saw in the chat Tina Lane.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Tina. This is Tina Lane from Essex.
Yeah. Oh, yes, Tina Lane from Essex. So I have a question about the special ed increase in personnel for them. And I was wondering, can you say what percentage of referrals to special ed are parent initiated versus school initiated?
Not off the top of my head.
Are most of them parents advocating for help for their children, or is it something that teachers are saying are suggesting?
I don't have the data in front of me, and I would just be spitballing an answer. So that's something we could certainly get for you.
I'd like to know that. And then also, I was wondering with the COVID relief funds, I know that I was wondering if is there any personnel that you invested in with those funds that are now part of the operating budget?
One math interventionist is being incorporated into the FY24 budget.
Okay. And then the curriculum director, so we have an interim director right now, is that true?
Yes.
And so I noticed she was once employed by Culture 7. And I was wondering if is that a criteria for your next?
It is not.
No. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you, Tina. I don't have a computer next to me. Is there anyone else in the chat? Okay, we don't see anyone else in the chat. Last call for anyone from the telephone. I will not be returning to the online option here, so speak now, forever hold your peace. Okay. Any final, Nina?
I'll keep it sweet. I do want to say, Nina, and I want to thank everyone, and certainly I thank everyone's attendance and certainly support. I think Antonella, that was her name, I think she sort of said it best with either narrative or the optic, because the optic to the community still is, I know school choice is a big part of it. I know if you look at the numbers, we actually have really the same trending enrollment. The optic is that our enrollment's declining, our budget is increasing. So when I say programs, it's sort of what Jake is saying, it's what Jody was saying, it's looking at how do we be creative? Like, the community doesn't want to keep hearing we're just doing the same. I know we're not doing the same, but somehow the community feels it's the same. We're just passing level services or whatever we present, because at the end of the day, if we are the fourth best high school in the state, we wouldn't be losing kids. That's the optic. And I know, again, we can go through this finer detail, but if we're that good, why are people from middle school making the transition? And that's where I think we have to be careful how it's asked. If we're looking at monies for this year and then 3 years asking more, I think the community would be wanting to see what is changing, what is being offered. There's great programs, but I would think there's always room to make something a little different, just like the new electives were coming. Like, I think it's great to see Spanish maybe put back in, and I was French speaking, so not put in French, I think it's great to really analyze all of it. And I guess that would be my ask to you all, the committee, because I know that's what you all are looking at, is that bigger picture. And I think, at least from the people I'm hearing from, that's what the community wants to say. They don't want to just keep seeing same. And the numbers sort of don't paint the picture. And it's like,
Thank you.
what's most articulate?
That's all right. That's all right. And I'm going to reserve my response because I just want to say thank you. Okay. Last shot.
I just want to say thank you. This is not easy. There is no solution here that's going to please it. So it's a messy process.
Yeah.
So thanks everyone here for their time.
So in closing here, we've done a nice job listening, which is excellent, and the goal, because we will have time to deliberate on the 7th and to discuss this further. One thing, so I guess at this point, what I'd just like us to close with is very briefly, if there's anything in particular that the committee would like to say, this would help me between now and then understand something better. So, so that when we come on the 7th, we know what we're, and if you don't know it right now, that's okay. Email it to Pam directly.
I kind of
between
like
now
to
and
hear
then.
now. 'cause
Okay,
I-
all right.
So we
I
have
have a
covered
couple
everything
things, yeah.
from, let's get some programming back
Right.
to let's restructure. So what do you need to see going into the 7th
Right,
to solve the problem
right.
at hand?
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
This just has, I just like to ask a general question. I know some people already left, but I know we've talked a lot tonight about how, we've asked for money for Memorial and then also asked for money for the high school years ago. How long was the vote? How long ago was the vote for Memorial School?
2018, maybe,
18?
2020,
Okay.
2018?
No.
Was it?
17 or
Probably.
18.
And part of my ask here, and this maybe goes to the story a little bit. I think that number that we asked for and was approved by 2/3 of both towns, like, doesn't need to be exact, but what was the general number?
It was a $52 million project.
$52 million we asked, and both towns approved that, to pay $52 million for that school. And then, how much did the school actually cost?
It's gonna, the final spending is, at this point, about $500,000 under budget, roughly speaking,
So it's cost about 51.5 million?
roughly.
Okay, but how much wasn't there a big difference between what the towns would have to pay and what ended up having to be paid?
Yeah, we provided estimates of what it would cost based on the borrowing rates.
Yeah.
And that has also yielded significant savings. I think we had a 5% estimate at the time based on what we were being advised from financial advisors. Those numbers have come in closer to 3%. So significant savings there as well.
That's what I'm wondering if it would help, and as far as the story goes, how much money have we saved both of our taxpayer bases, over that, I guess, 5-year period now? Versus what we're asking for now? Would that help in any way? Because I know we're talking about what can be, what people can afford, and if the school district has been saving so much money from what we've already asked 4 or 5 years ago, maybe we could ask for a little bit of those savings back now, It's just an idea. I don't know what those numbers are, but.
Yeah, and I think that was part of the
they're pretty
thinking behind the
significant,
capital
right?
solution is exactly that. So maybe
Right,
we can
same
articulate
thing.
it a little bit more clearly.
Right.
I'm just going right around here. Kate, is there anything that would help you?
I think at the last meeting, we had talked about looking at how maxing out our school choice options would impact the budget. Yep.
I could get that. It's 5,000 per head.
Right.
So if we're looking for 100,000, I mean, what's the target? What do you think? As high as we can go.
Right.
What's the max?
What is?
Just stay.
So you mean as a solution, looking to increase class sizes
No, looking to increase revenue.
Within the structure we have of
Within
the
our
staff.
recommended, within the
Gotcha.
school committee's recommended class size.
Okay.
Because when I look at our
Size of
program
things,
and
yeah.
when I look at the columns, I believe Pam when Pam says this is what is the most educationally sound option and the most responsible option for us as a school committee. But I also know my community and I know the demographics of my community, and I know that bringing an ask that involves putting money back and involves bringing programs back at the same time that we are asking our taxpayers to dig into their pockets deeper is going to be a hard sell in Essex.
So
Um,
it's perfectly reasonable to say, we want to stick with the level services.
well, that's where I want to stick.
Well, that's, yeah, but we don't have to like decide that, right? I think right now we just want to get through what is helpful
I'm casting my
information
vote
for
now.
us. No, what is helpful information for us so that on the
Direction is fine,
7th,
too.
we can
If
do
you
that.
have direction on, these proposals,
Mhm.
that would help us as well, because we do want to try to adopt a budget next time in addition to presenting information.
I'm mildly concerned about us coming together as a direction though, based on the feedback we just got tonight, because there will be people who offer feedback to us based on what they heard tonight also. And I think it's really important that we as a committee members take in all of the inputs before we offer a direction on that. Okay, I've got some things. I'm just going around the table. So to jump from level service to reinstate stabilize, I don't need to know anything about the capital and reinstate capital investment line. But on those, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 add backs, what I would like to know is what is the intended use? I'm not asking for a specific thing, but is the late bus, are we really likely to utilize that in a different way than before? If not, I'd rather push it out another year. So, but I want to know, like, if there's an actual plan for utilizing it in a different way. I'm all for having some form of equitable transportation for kids to Essex because it's the amount of times we have to drive. But anyway, so that's helpful. The middle school Spanish, I actually don't have questions about. The small cap and the stabilization funding line, I'd like to see how this, I'm really concerned that we're gonna have to make this decision with now this potential new idea, mixing up the conversation. So what would be helpful for me is to, if we can, I don't know if we have time to get another collaboration meeting in to see how firm our team is on that, because I came out of that meeting as well. It was late in the meeting. Some people had already gone. I know Brendan was gone when we had that conversation, but it sounded, but again, also it hadn't been brought to boards to formally endorse in any way, and I understand that. So I'd like to get a greater sense, because I don't feel I can make a decision on that, the stabilization line without that information, whether we're likely to go that route or not. And then the final thing is I'd like to know about the 0.5 payroll purchasing support. Is this to bump up? Is this the same position that we've had trouble filling from the reorg? So we haven't been able to fill the halftime and we want to bump it up to a full so that we can. Okay, I would just like to know a little bit more about, do we think we can fill that, number one, and what additional benefit that's going to bring, knowing that we've done without any currently, knowing that. So I just want to know some details on each of these asks. Just all that, as much as is possible. Jake?
So a couple things. I think I'm with Teresa saying that, of the 4 columns we have in this chart here, the middle 2 are the ones to play out. So it would help me very much because, to be honest, I think we've conflated a lot of things over these past months. If we can clearly lay out what the budget is for FY '24 for these 2 options and the 3-year model for each of those 2 options, so that we can see the big picture, we can have a conversation about this option versus that option, and we know what we're asking for in there. And to support that, on paper, the basic assumptions we're making, because we talk a lot about it, I think they're floating around. And some of them are in the slides, but it all kind of gets conflated. So what are our assumptions that drive those 2 options? And, that may be, take the form of a very brief narrative or something. I don't know what it looks like. I don't have a suggestion on that, but let's be clear about what those assumptions are that underlie the 2 and what we're trying to accomplish with those 2 options. I think we put it in the ether. We don't have it clear so that everybody can look at it. So with that, I think we should come prepared to think about some sort, along with making a budget, voting a budget. We should also, as a committee, consider a commitment to looking at the spending side, increasing revenue. Looking at, I loved Kathy's, language around, doing that kind of transformational analysis, right? That's kind of a different language that I've been trying to articulate and not being successful at. And a commitment doesn't mean that we're gonna make changes. A commitment just means that we all commit to looking at those options. So, I think that's a responsible thing for us to do.
Okay.
But we need to do it at that same time. So come prepared to talk about that.
I can't promise that because that is such a big picture commitment that is being asked so for me, can we start with one thing at a time?
Can we at
And
least
those
discuss it as part of the?
We're all taking that in, but when we talk about the budget on 2/7, I am concerned. I don't want us to get lost. We're gonna have a lot on our plate already, and if we start getting lost in, well, okay, but in the next 3 years, that means that we have to plan out that time of how we're gonna look at all of that thing. I don't think we can accomplish that on 2/7.
But to me, it's key to this notion of the timeline, right? Are we asking for a 3-year, right?
We're not asking for anything. That's how the towns are choosing to do that.
No, we gotta put a number forward that they can work with for the next 3 years, right? So this 1.4 versus the 1.7, 3 years, our ask.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going on a different line of reasoning than you are. That's fine. Sorry, I'll wrap my head around the way you're saying it. Got it.
Thank you.
No,
Let me try to organize my thoughts. So again, me coming in new, I do think that I can help to provide a more newer perspective versus like people who've been here for a few years. And I'm not involved in the politics whatsoever, so I could care less about the politics. But I know that it's very important when it comes to this. But with my background, I do know that right now it's all about the numbers. And it's all about what the story people are trying to know. And then when both towns are trying to, we talk a lot about this is up to the 2 towns. But the problem is the 2 towns are trying to come to us, looking at us, trying to figure out what's the story here. That they don't feel comfortable yet that what we are telling. Not only in the presentation, which a lot of people have been expressing as confusing, but also in the process and the way that we're saying it. And I think to Kathy, personally, if I were to decide right now to vote yes or no on the budget, I wouldn't feel comfortable personally, just because right now I feel like I'm voting in a vacuum. So what I can see on this piece of paper, for example, the 4 columns that you have put together, I don't get why we're talking about the add-ins in addition to 756,000. When we already have a carryover to 90K potentially from the previous year, which already could pay for all this add-on, most of it. So what I'm saying is not like it's right or wrong, but I do think that the way that we are telling the story in the numbers or in the narratives is not clear enough, and it's what people are looking for. And to Kathy's point about the different analysis and whatnot, the 3-year projection that we did before is assuming enrollment status quo. And that is, we all know that's not the case. So I actually do think that, and I know that we won't be able to get to it or do this before February 7th. But I agree with you and with others too, with Kathy, we do need to do additional analysis to be able to show the story that we're trying to show. Like, for example, to the revenue, what does that mean? Can we do the school choice? How many do we need? And the school size, the class size, the last time, as I remember correctly, the last time that the school committee decided on the class size of 18 or 19 was 10, however many years ago. Times has changed, as Kathy said. Is that right? Is that wrong? How does that impact our, the number of the teachers that we have? So I think both towns are all on the same page. At least I believe so, that we all want the best for the schools. I think what they want is to feel comfortable. That what they want is to show the data, and they feel comfortable that if they were to ask for override, we are going to deliver. and we know what we're doing, that we're actually monitoring all the finances, the budgets, that so they can trust. So what I'm saying is I support the additional work that we need to do, whichever direction we need to do. I don't know, this might be a one, but we do need to plan it out as a school committee. Some of it might be this year. Some of it may be some things that we can do the next week. Some of us have the skill set, like within the committee or outside the committee, to do that for you guys. Let us do that. Some of it might be multi-year. We have to plan it out. Because I personally feel that I will be voting in the vacuum.
Yes, this is a lot for, I am new to budget season and I am still trying to wrap my head around the fact that if we want to remain a top performing school district, and I think somebody mentioned, maybe Ben, you did some of the modeling out for the spending of other top performing school districts. People end up in the 3+%, but we are consistently trying to come in below that, then we're going to constantly come out over budget. And I just can't get myself out of this cycle of, I appreciate and agree that we should be looking at, if there's something different we can do structurally with the program. That's really confusing to me when so much of the program is personnel and healthcare, because I don't know how much we can do with that, but of course we should be looking for creative solutions. I did like the idea. The one thing I think it is within our control is what we could do about revenue. And so I would echo I would love to see something modeled out for school choice, which is ironic because I lived through the time when I probably wrote you many emails about stopping school choice so that we could all fit in the building. I think this is a lot before the next meeting, but I think we should think about ads on the field. I mean, we're trying to get a new field. I mean, what's the company the biotech that's moving into Manchester? Be a great opportunity. We can put their name all over the field. Happy to do it. Just, for 800,000. That's what it's gonna cost. But I mean, we should be talking about these opportunities. They might be out there. So on the more discrete level, I do think it's worth starting our budget reflecting. I know, Avi, I appreciate what you're saying, that you can't predict whether somebody's going to need to go out of district. So the 290 that we're seeing might not be a true number, but it does seem like maybe there's some give here where we could reflect that in our budget. And I personally, because I'm concerned about Essex having to vote on two separate things. That just seems to me optically a challenge to say vote on an override and then vote on a capital exclusion. So I would love to see a budget that doesn't rely on that and figures out how we're going to afford the fields. And I have one very tiny question that I think you can answer now. Don't we have middle school Spanish? I'm very confused. My middle schooler is taking Spanish.
Yes, sixth grade.
Sixth grade has no
Part of the
Spanish?
cut last year was K6.
I didn't
It was a
realize that.
K6 cut. Because those are exploratory in nature, at seventh grade, it starts being one of their 4 or 5.
Okay.
It's a 0.6. It goes in the rotation with art and music and PE.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then Matt?
Yeah, I had to, and I'm sorry for my sitting on edge like this. I should have done that long ago. Matt?
My only editorializing is, some people have said the number is big this year. The number was, the number was smaller last year than smaller the year before. So this has been a bit artificially graded that the number is even bigger this year. So when we say it's a big ask, it wasn't as big last year or the year before. I think the only word I've heard more than that override or apportionment has been COVID. So it's not like this is a new thing. My only thing to Pam's question, I don't even know if this is a Pam question, but when we say like, oh, it's a big number, I actually don't know. Is there a simple equation to actually find out like how much it would cost, like you as a household, this? Because that could be an interesting thing, like X times Y equals.
We have that.
He has that for Essex, yeah.
Yeah.
Can we then like share that? Like we're talking in the millions, but it's like, well, I don't,
Right.
not that I don't care about the $1 million number, but I care about the.
It's about 690
525, 650 in terms of the average single-family home in Essex, based on the modeling we did with a lot of caveats, obviously, because.
Is that experience, is there one for Manchester, is that experience?
Oh, I don't know what it is for Manchester, because each town, you know, may approach it differently in
Right.
terms of how you pay for
I
it.
think it'd just be an interesting data point for what we're talking about, so, that's all. And maybe nothing you for you, Pat, but just.
And I think we all recognize that we just all gave you our laundry list of things that we would like in the next 2 weeks to help us make this decision. And I think that it's reasonable to say we know that's a lot. And so the idea is to give you a sense of the tone of the kind of things that we want, as much as can be answered. You know, we certainly recognize there are limitations on your time and energy, also recognizing we do have to make this decision. So what we can will be helpful. Pam or Robbie, do you want to share anything before we close this out?
I'm just trying to process the scope of what we're really looking for next week and what is reasonable to accomplish.
Yep.
Yeah, I think, well, you can go ahead. I thought you were gonna-
I've got savings on refinancing from debts. That's a lookup. Dollars to be earned from school choice. That's fairly easy because we're coming up on our modeling time for that anyway. So there's a process in place for that. I have to follow up on Tina's question. That's a simple thing. I think that's a simple thing to do. We want a one pager on assumptions, but we're also thinking about totally like scratching our budget process and starting over. So what pieces do we need to have now to build enough understand? I mean, I'm probably prone to oversimplification, but I'm fearful that we are trying to provide so much information and answer every sub question in every real deep dive that it is getting more confusing, when the reality is we do have declining enrollment, as do other districts. In other districts with declining enrollment, you see the same trend of increased cost at about the same rate as ours, which then impacts increased per pupil expenditure. We do not model differently than any other district in the state, but we are basically approaching this as if we have a fundamental spending problem and are doing disservices to our town. I don't think that's an accurate assessment. I think there's a lot to be gained in looking beyond ourselves, as much as there is to maybe retooling how we do things for next year to look deeper within ourselves. But this is a problem we've been signaling for 4 years.
And I don't know that that's a universal assessment. It's just what we're hearing most frequently, because those are the voices that are coming to the table currently.
And I'm still looking for direction on scope of the program. I'm presenting to you what I think I hear from feedbacks, where some people wanted to see what it looked like with add-ins.
Right.
I understand that it's concerning.
Yep.
To some, but I'm presenting to you what it would look like with add-ins.
Yeah.
Right.
And part of that is
Yeah.
a political exercise. We have to do that. When it comes to the budget and you present level services, as Matt said, we have had input about these things. You know, we've had lots of input about the special ed, and I forgot about the late bus because I haven't personally been hearing it. We've all given up on it, but you know, and so when we ask for these add-ins, or when we go through this exercise, part of it is to give you guys a chance to account for that, the input that's come in. And that's something that's really important for our public to understand as well, that we do have to account for these things that consistently come up as feedback, and find, whether it's going to be budget neutral or not, at least we have the information in the open.
Yeah, and I can just elaborate on that a bit. So, again, these choices were what we asked for at the last meeting because, we've heard, I think we've all heard, we hear a lot of people commenting on what we don't have and asking for more. So we asked at our last meeting as a collective group, we asked, well, we feel a little uncomfortable with only asking for level services again, either level services or cuts again for the third year in a row. What would it, if we're going to ask for money, what would it look like if we asked to put some things back? We wanted to see the numbers so we could look at them and then say, Which is, like, we can't do that, right? Or whatever the decision may be, but that's where the ask came from.
I think we've done our work tonight, folks. Oh, there will be there's not even is school committee comment even on the agenda tonight? It's not. So there,
Keep your
so
comments to yourself tonight, Teresa.
thank you. Thank you all for attending in person, and to those who had to leave already, if they catch this on replay, if they decide to log in for the last few minutes or something. Much appreciation for your input, for your service, for your assistance, and also to those joined us online. Thank you. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. That's Matt Harrington. Second. That's seconded by Erica. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Anything? That's unanimous.